The vast expanse of the Pontic-Caspian steppes stretching from the Dnieper River to the Ural Mountains witnessed the emergence of one of history's most consequential peoples between 4000 and 3000 BC. Here, across the windswept grasslands that would later echo with the thunder of countless migrations, the Proto-Indo-Europeans forged the foundations of a cultural and linguistic legacy that would reshape the ancient world. The archaeological record from this region reveals a sophisticated society that mastered the horse, perfected wheeled transport, and developed metallurgical techniques that gave them decisive advantages over their contemporaries. Excavations at key sites across the Pontic-Caspian region have yielded compelling evidence of Proto-Indo-European material culture. At Mikhailovka on the lower Dnieper, archaeologists uncovered substantial settlements featuring rectangular houses with stone foundations and evidence of advanced bronzeworking techniques. The inhabitants practiced a mixed economy combining cattle herding with limited agriculture, a pattern that would become characteristic of Indo-European societies. Pottery sherds from these sites display distinctive cord-mark decorations, while bronze axes, daggers, and ornaments demonstrate sophisticated metallurgical knowledge that surpassed contemporary cultures in surrounding regions. The Sredny Stog culture, dating to approximately 4500–3500 BC, provides crucial insights into early Proto-Indo-European society. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dorivka reveals the first clear evidence of horse domestication, with worn tooth patterns indicating the use of bits and bridles. These early horsemen constructed kurgan burial mounds that would become the signature archaeological marker of Indo-European expansion. The grave goods recovered from these burial sites tell a story of a hierarchical society where elite warriors were interred with bronze weapons, horse sacrifices, and wheeled vehicles that proclaimed their status and power. Linguistic reconstruction through comparative philology has revealed a remarkable unity underlying the diverse Indo-European language family. By systematically comparing cognate words across Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Germanic, Celtic, and other branches, scholars have reconstructed substantial portions of the original Proto-Indo-European vocabulary. This reconstructed lexicon provides a window into the material culture and worldview of these ancient peoples. The presence of shared terms for wheeled vehicles, including words for wheel, axle, and wagon, indicates that Proto-Indo-Europeans possessed advanced transportation technology. Similarly, the extensive vocabulary related to horses suggests not merely familiarity with these animals, but their central importance in Proto-Indo-European society. The reconstructed vocabulary reveals a people intimately familiar with metallurgy, particularly bronze working. Common Indo-European roots for metals, tools, and weapons demonstrate that these technologies were well established before the major dispersals began. Terms for specific bronze implements, including axes, spears, and daggers, appear across the language family with remarkable consistency. This linguistic evidence aligns perfectly with archaeological findings from steppe sites, where bronze artifacts represent some of the most sophisticated metalwork of the period. Proto-Indo-European religious and social vocabulary provides additional insights into their cultural practices. Reconstructed terms for religious concepts, including words for sacred fire, ritual sacrifice, and divine authority, suggest a complex pantheon and elaborate ceremonial practices. The linguistic evidence for patriarchal social organisation, warrior bands, and cattle-based wealth systems corresponds closely with archaeological interpretations of kurgan burials and settlement patterns. The environmental conditions of the Eurasian steppes played a crucial role in shaping Proto-Indo-European culture and technological innovations. The vast grasslands provided ideal grazing for cattle and horses, while the relative scarcity of arable land encouraged mobility and pastoral specialisation. Seasonal patterns of rainfall and temperature fluctuations required sophisticated knowledge of animal husbandry and pasture management. These environmental pressures fostered innovations in transportation, particularly the development of wheeled vehicles that could efficiently move people, goods, and livestock across great distances. The steppe environment also influenced Proto-Indo-European social organisation and military practices. The open terrain favoured mounted warfare and rapid movement, leading to the development of mobile warrior bands that could strike quickly and retreat before enemy forces could organise effective resistance. The necessity of protecting herds from raiders and wild predators created a martial culture where fighting skills were essential for survival and prosperity. Archaeological evidence suggests that bronze weapons were not merely ceremonial objects, but practical tools used in regular combat and raiding. Climate data from the 4th millennium BC indicates that the Pontic-Caspian steppes experienced relatively favourable conditions during the formative period of Proto-Indo-European culture. Pollen analysis and other paleo-environmental indicators suggest adequate rainfall and moderate temperatures that supported extensive grasslands and diverse wildlife populations. These conditions enabled the expansion of pastoral populations and the accumulation of surplus wealth that funded technological innovations and social stratification. Recent genetic studies utilising ancient DNA analysis have revolutionised understanding of Proto-Indo-European origins and dispersals. Examination of skeletal remains from Kurgan burials has revealed distinctive genetic signatures that can be traced across subsequent Indo-European populations. The predominance of Y chromosome haplogroups, R1a and R1b among ancient steppe populations, provides compelling evidence for the genetic continuity between Proto-Indo-Europeans and their descendants throughout Europe and Asia. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA from female lineages reveals a more complex pattern, suggesting that Proto-Indo-European expansions involve the movement of predominantly male populations who intermarried with local women in their new territories. This pattern aligns with historical accounts of Indo-European migrations and conquests, where warrior bands established political dominance while adopting certain aspects of local cultures. Genome-wide analysis of ancient DNA has confirmed the substantial genetic impact of steppe populations on later European and Asian populations. Studies of Bronze Age skeletons from across Europe show clear evidence of steppe ancestry, with percentages varying by region and time period. The genetic data demonstrates that Indo-European expansions were not merely cultural diffusions, but involved substantial population movements that permanently altered the genetic landscape of vast regions. The distribution patterns of R1a and R1b haplogroups correspond closely with the historical spread of Indo-European languages. R1a frequencies are highest in Slavic-speaking populations and in India, regions that received substantial migration from steppe populations during different periods. R1b shows peak frequencies in Western Europe, particularly among Celtic and Germanic populations, reflecting the western branch of Indo-European expansion. These genetic patterns provide independent confirmation of migration routes and settlement patterns inferred from archaeological and linguistic evidence. Archaeological investigations have revealed the sophisticated technological achievements that gave Proto-Indo-Europeans decisive advantages over their contemporaries. Bronze working techniques developed on the steppes produced weapons and tools of exceptional quality and durability. Analyses of bronze artifacts show advanced understanding of alloy composition and heat treatment methods that maximize the effectiveness of copper-tin mixtures. These metallurgical innovations spread rapidly throughout Indo-European territories, often displacing earlier stone and copper technologies. The development of wheeled transport represents perhaps the most significant technological innovation of Proto-Indo-European culture. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials includes actual wagon remains and detailed artistic representations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of wheel construction and vehicle design. These early wagons featured solid wooden wheels attached to fixed axles, with body construction optimized for carrying heavy loads across rough terrain. The mobility provided by wheeled transport enabled Proto-Indo-Europeans to exploit vast territories and maintain communication networks across enormous distances. Horse domestication and riding techniques gave Proto-Indo-Europeans unparalleled military and economic advantages. evidence from bit wear on horse teeth indicates sophisticated training methods that produced reliable mounts capable of complex manoeuvres. The combination of horses and wheeled vehicles created transportation systems that far exceeded the capabilities of contemporary cultures dependent on foot travel or simple boats. This mobility advantage proved crucial in subsequent expansions and conquests. The material culture recovered from Proto-Indo-European sites demonstrates a society capable of producing surplus wealth and supporting specialised craftsmen. Bronze ornaments, decorated pottery, and elaborate grave goods indicate social stratification and the accumulation of prestige items. Trade networks extended across vast distances, bringing amber from the Baltic, shells from distant seas, and exotic stones from mountain regions. These exchange systems required sophisticated organisational abilities and established the foundation for later Indo-European commercial networks. The transformation of Proto-Indo-European society reached its zenith with the emergence of the Yamnaya culture around 3300 BC, marking a decisive shift from the earlier Sredni stock traditions toward a more militarised and expansionist civilization. Named after the Russian word for pit, referring to their characteristic burial practices, the Yamnaya represented the full flowering of steppe pastoralism and the technological innovations that would enable their descendants to dominate vast territories from Ireland to India. Archaeological excavations across the Pontic-Caspian steppes have revealed a culture of unprecedented sophistication, combining advanced metallurgy, revolutionary transportation technology, and social organisation optimised for conquest and territorial expansion. The Yamnaya heartlands stretched across the grasslands between the Bug and Ural rivers, encompassing modern-day Ukraine, southern Russia, and western Kazakhstan. Sites like Repin, Mikhailovka the Three, and numerous Kurgan cemeteries across the region provide detailed insights into Yamnaya material culture and social practices. The pottery assemblages from these sites display the characteristic cord-marked decorations that became a hallmark of early Indo-European cultures, while bronze implements demonstrate metallurgical techniques that surpass contemporary civilizations in complexity and effectiveness. Radiocarbon dating places the height of Yamnaya influence between 3300 and 2600 BC, coinciding with the period of initial Indo-European dispersals that would reshape the demographic landscape of Eurasia. Yamnaya settlements reveal a society organised around mobile pastoralism, with substantial seasonal camps that could accommodate large populations and their livestock. Excavations at Mikhailovka III uncovered rectangular structures with stone foundations, storage pits for grain and other provisions, and workshop areas where bronzesmiths crafted weapons and tools. The site yielded numerous bronze axes, daggers, and spearheads, displaying sophisticated craftsmanship, including complex hafting techniques and decorative elements that proclaim the status of their owners. Pottery sherds from cooking and storage vessels show evidence of dairy processing, indicating that cattle herding had become the economic foundation of Yamnaya society. The revolutionary adoption of wheeled vehicles transformed Yamnaya capabilities for both warfare and long-distance movement. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials includes actual wagon remains, with preserved wooden wheels, axles, and body frameworks that demonstrate advanced carpentry techniques. These vehicles featured solid wooden wheels carved from single pieces of wood or constructed from multiple planks held together with wooden dowels and metal reinforcements. The wagons measured approximately 4 meters in length and 2 meters in width, capable of carrying substantial loads across the steppes while maintaining structural integrity over rough terrain. Detailed analysis of wheel construction reveals sophisticated understanding of load distribution and mechanical stress. The wheels attached to fixed axles through bronze or wooden bearings that reduced friction and prevented premature wear. Wagon bodies incorporated flexible suspension systems using leather straps and wooden springs that absorbed shocks from uneven ground. These innovations enabled Yamnaya groups to transport entire households including elderly members, children, and accumulated wealth, across distances that would have been impossible for pedestrian societies. The military applications of wheeled transport proved equally significant. Yamnaya warriors utilised war carts equipped with bronze-reinforced sides and specialised fittings for weapon storage. These vehicles served as mobile command platforms during battles and provided rapid transportation for elite fighters across the battlefield. The psychological impact of wheeled vehicles on foot-bound enemies cannot be underestimated, as the sight and sound of approaching war carts would have created panic among populations unfamiliar with such technology. Horse domestication reached new levels of sophistication under Yamnaya culture, transforming these animals from occasional mounts into integral components of military and economic systems. Excavations at Yamnaya sites have yielded numerous horse skeletons, displaying clear evidence of bitwear, indicating systematic training and regular use for riding. The horses themselves were larger and more robust than their Sredni Stog predecessors, suggesting selective breeding programs designed to produce animals capable of carrying armed warriors and pulling heavy loads. Bit technology advanced considerably during the Yamnaya period, with bronze and bone examples showing complex designs optimized for control and communication between rider and mount. These bits featured jointed mouthpieces that provided precise steering capabilities, while decorative elements proclaimed the status of their owners. Harness fittings recovered from burial contexts include bronze cheek pieces, strap distributors, and ornamental plaques that transformed functional equipment into symbols of wealth and power. The combination of horses and wheeled vehicles created transportation systems of unprecedented capability. Yamnaya herders could move vast cattle herds across seasonal pastures while maintaining rapid communication between dispersed groups. Warriors mounted on horseback could conduct reconnaissance missions, launch surprise attacks, and retreat before enemy forces could organise effective resistance. The mobility advantage provided by horse-drawn vehicles enabled Yamnaya groups to exploit territories spanning hundreds of kilometres while maintaining social cohesion and military coordination. Kurgan burial traditions reached their most elaborate expression during the Yamnaya period, reflecting the hierarchical social structures and warrior aristocracies that dominated late Proto-Indo-European society. The largest kurgans rose to heights exceeding 10 metres and covered areas of several hundred square metres, requiring coordinated labour from entire communities. Construction involved sophisticated engineering techniques, including stone retaining walls, drainage systems, and carefully planned burial chambers designed to protect grave goods and human remains for millennia. The primary burials within major kurgans reveal the extraordinary wealth and status of Yamnaya elites. Male warriors were typically interred in contracted positions on their right sides, heads oriented toward the east, surrounded by bronze weapons, horse sacrifices, and wheeled vehicles that proclaimed their authority and achievements. The bronze assemblages from these burials include battle axes with elaborate shaft-hole construction, daggers with complex hilting systems, and spearheads displaying advanced metallurgical techniques. Many weapons show clear signs of use wear, indicating that they were practical implements employed in actual combat rather than merely ceremonial objects. Female burials, while less numerous in primary positions, demonstrate the important roles women played in Yamnaya society. Elite women were buried with bronze ornaments, including elaborate headdresses, torques, and spiral arm rings that required considerable metallurgical skill to produce. Pottery vessels associated with female burials often show evidence of specialised functions, including drinking cups, storage jars, and ritual implements that suggest roles in religious ceremonies and household management. The secondary burials surrounding primary interments reveal the complex social hierarchies that characterised Yamnaya culture. Retainer burials include warriors, craftsmen, and servants who were apparently sacrificed to accompany their lords in death. Horse sacrifices were particularly elaborate, with complete animals or carefully selected portions buried in specific arrangements around the central grave. Some kurgans contain multiple horse skulls arranged in circular patterns, while others include entire horses with preserved harness fittings and riding equipment. Analysis of Kurgan construction sequences reveals the gradual accumulation of burials over extended periods, with later interments added to existing mounds through careful excavation and resealing procedures. This practice created sacred landscapes where multiple generations of elite families established their claims to territorial control and ancestral authority. The investment of labour and resources required for Kurgan construction demonstrates the ability of Yamnaya leaders to command substantial followings and organise large-scale construction projects. The westward migrations that began during the later Yamnaya period mark the commencement of Indo-European demographic expansion across Europe and beyond. Archaeological evidence from the Danube Valley shows clear evidence of Yamnaya presence by 3000 BC, with characteristic pottery styles, bronze implements and burial practices appearing at sites previously occupied by Neolithic farming communities. The Usatovo culture of the Dniester region represents one of the earliest manifestations of this westward movement, combining Yamnaya material culture with local traditions in ways that foreshadowed later patterns of Indo-European settlement and cultural adaptation. Excavations at sites like Myaki and Usatovo itself have revealed fortified settlements featuring Yamnaya-style rectangular houses, bronze working facilities, and Kurgan cemeteries that demonstrate the establishment of permanent Yamnaya populations in previously non-Indo-European territories. The bronze assemblages from these sites include both typical Yamnaya weapon types and new forms adapted to local conditions and raw material availability. Pottery styles show clear Yamnaya influence, while incorporating decorative elements derived from earlier Cucuteni Tripelia traditions. The demographic impact of these early migrations appears to have been substantial, with genetic analysis of skeletal remains showing significant steppe ancestry among populations that had previously displayed purely Neolithic European characteristics. The pattern suggests organised colonisation rather than gradual cultural diffusion, with Yamnaya groups establishing political dominance while intermarrying with local populations. This process created hybrid societies that retained Indo-European languages and key cultural practices while adapting to new environmental conditions and incorporating useful local technologies. The Balkans witnessed similar patterns of Yamnaya expansion, with sites across modern-day Romania, Bulgaria and Hungary showing clear evidence of steppe influence during the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BC. The Baden culture of the Carpathian Basin displays numerous Yamnaya characteristics, including wheeled vehicles, horse remains and metallurgical traditions derived from steppe prototypes. Kurgan burials appear across the region, often superimposed on earlier Tell settlements in ways that suggest conquest and territorial reorganisation. The technological advantages that enabled Yamnaya expansion extended beyond transportation and metallurgy to include advanced weapon systems optimised for mobile warfare. Bronze battle axes from Yamnaya contexts display sophisticated shaft-hole construction techniques that create exceptionally durable and effective weapons. These axes featured carefully designed weight distribution that maximised impact force while maintaining balance for repeated use. Decorative elements included geometric patterns and animal motifs that proclaimed the status and achievements of their owners. Spear technology reached new levels of effectiveness during the Yamnaya period, with bronze points displaying advanced metallurgical techniques, including controlled cooling and surface hardening. The socketed construction of Yamnaya spearheads provided superior attachment to wooden shafts while enabling easy replacement of damaged points. Length variations suggest specialised functions, with shorter spears optimised for mounted combat and longer versions designed for infantry formations and hunting large game. The bow and arrow remained important components of Yamnaya military technology, with bone and antler arrowheads showing sophisticated design features optimised for penetration and accuracy. Bronze arrowheads appear in elite contexts, displaying the same metallurgical expertise evident in larger weapons. Composite bow technology, utilising combinations of wood, bone and sinew, provided superior range and power compared to simple wooden bows used by contemporary cultures. Defensive equipment evolved to counter the improved offensive capabilities of Yamnaya warfare. Bronze-reinforced shields appear in burial contexts, featuring metal bosses and rim reinforcements that provided protection against bronze weapons while maintaining manageable weight for mobile combat. Leather armour with bronze studs and plates offered personal protection for elite warriors, while maintaining the flexibility required for horseback riding and rapid movement. The social organisation that supported Yamnaya military effectiveness centred on warrior brotherhoods that combined religious, military and economic functions. These groups, possibly related to the later Germanic Koreos tradition, provided training and indoctrination for young males, while serving as the core military force for Yamnaya communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that these warrior bands operated semi-independently, conducting raids and expeditions that extended Yamnaya influence far beyond their core territories. The religious practices associated with Yamnaya warrior culture emphasized martial virtues and the sanctification of violence in service of community expansion. Weapon burials suggest that bronze implements possess spiritual as well as practical significance, with elaborate rituals surrounding their manufacture, use, and final deposition. The orientation of Kurgan burials toward the east reflects cosmological beliefs that connected the daily rebirth of the sun with concepts of heroic afterlife and eternal warfare. The warrior bands that emerged from Yamnaya society represented far more than simple military units. They constituted a fundamental institution that would shape Indo-European culture for millennia. The Koreos, reconstructed from linguistic evidence across the Indo-European language family, formed the backbone of Proto-Indo-European expansion and conquest. These brotherhoods of young men, bound by sacred oaths and ritualized violence, operated according to principles that transcended ordinary social structures and created elite fighting forces capable of extraordinary feats of warfare and territorial acquisition. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burials reveals the material culture associated with these warrior brotherhoods. Excavations at sites like Sintashta and Archaim have uncovered group burials featuring multiple young males interred with identical weapon sets, suggesting coordinated deaths in battle or ritualized sacrifice. The bronze assemblages from these contexts include matching battle axes, spears and daggers that display standardized manufacturing techniques and decorative motifs. This uniformity indicates organized production systems designed to equip warrior bands with consistent, high-quality equipment that proclaim their membership in elite military organizations. The linguistic reconstruction of Koreos terminology provides crucial insights into the structure and function of these warrior brotherhoods. Cognate terms appear across the Indo-European language family, from Germanic harjas meaning army or war band, to Celtic Koreos reflected in Old Irish quere meaning troop or company. Sanskrit kara and Avestan kara preserve related concepts of organised military units, while Greek kouros originally referred to young warriors before acquiring its later meaning of youth. The consistency of this vocabulary across diverse branches demonstrates that warrior brotherhoods constituted a pan-Indo-European institution that predated the major dispersals. The initiation rituals that transformed young men into Koreos members involved elaborate ceremonies designed to separate initiates from ordinary society and bind them to their warrior brothers through shared ordeals and sacred commitments. Comparative analysis of later Indo-European traditions reveals common elements that likely derive from Proto-Indo-European practices. Germanic sources describe young warriors living apart from settled communities, engaging in ritualized violence and cattle raiding that served both economic and religious functions. Celtic traditions preserve accounts of warrior bands operating under special legal codes that exempted them from normal social obligations while imposing strict internal discipline and loyalty requirements. The wolf symbolism that permeated Koreos culture reflected deep-seated beliefs about the spiritual transformation that occurred during warrior initiation. Proto-Indo-European religious concepts associated wolves with death, rebirth, and the liminal spaces between civilization and wilderness where warrior bands operated. The reconstructed term wulkwus appears across the language family in contexts relating to both the animal itself and human warriors who adopted wolf characteristics. Germanic traditions of berserkers and ulfhednar preserve these ancient associations, describing warriors who donned wolf pelts and entered trance states that enabled superhuman feats of violence and endurance. Archaeological evidence supports the central role of wolf symbolism in warrior culture. Bronze Age sites across Indo-European territories have yielded wolf-headed pins, belt fittings and weapon decorations that proclaimed the wearer's association with wolf powers. Kurgan burials often include wolf teeth and claws as grave goods, while some warrior interments feature complete wolf skeletons positioned alongside human remains. The Sintashta culture provides particularly striking examples, with chariot burials accompanied by wolf and dog sacrifices that suggest beliefs about supernatural companions accompanying warriors into the afterlife. The shape-shifting beliefs associated with Koryo's members reflected concepts of spiritual transformation that enabled ordinary young men to become supernatural warriors. Indo-European mythology preserves numerous accounts of heroes who could assume wolf form, gaining enhanced strength, speed, and ferocity in battle. These traditions likely derive from actual practices involving psychoactive substances, rhythmic dancing, and psychological conditioning that induced altered states of consciousness. The archaeological record provides indirect evidence for such practices through the recovery of specialized drinking vessels, ceremonial weapons, and ritual paraphernalia from warrior burial contexts. Germanic sources provide the most detailed accounts of wolf warrior traditions that preserve ancient Indo-European elements. The prose Edda describes berserkers who went without mail coats and acted like mad dogs or wolves, bit their shields and were as strong as bears or bulls. They slew men, but neither fire nor steel bit them. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites includes bear and wolf claws found in warrior graves, along with specialized weapons and ritual objects that support the historical reality of such warrior transformations. The Torslander helmet plates depict warriors wearing animal masks and engaging in ritualized combat, providing visual evidence for shape-shifting practices. The cattle raiding that formed a central component of Koryos activity served multiple functions beyond simple economic gain. These expeditions provided training for young warriors while generating wealth that supported their brotherhood activities. The mobility advantages provided by horses and wheeled vehicles enabled warrior bands to strike targets at considerable distances before retreating to safe territories. Archaeological evidence from Bronze Age sites across Europe shows clear signs of violent destruction followed by abandonment, suggesting systematic raiding campaigns that displaced existing populations and cleared territories for Indo-European settlement. The tactical innovations developed by Koryos warriors revolutionized Bronze Age warfare and provided decisive advantages over contemporary military systems. The combination of mounted archers, chariot-borne fighters, and mobile infantry created flexible formations capable of rapid maneuver and concentrated assault. Excavations at Sintashta have revealed the earliest evidence for spoke-wheeled chariots, representing a quantum leap in military technology that enabled unprecedented speed and mobility on the battlefield. These vehicles featured lightweight construction optimized for warfare rather than transportation, with reinforced floors designed to accommodate fighting crews and specialized fittings for weapon storage. The bronze weapons associated with chariot warfare display sophisticated metallurgical techniques and design features optimized for mounted combat. Spearheads from Sintashta contexts feature extended sockets and reinforced necks that prevented breakage during high-impact encounters. Battle axes designed for chariot use incorporated balanced weight distribution and specialized hafting systems that enabled effective use from moving vehicles. The standardization evident in these weapon assemblages suggests organized production systems capable of equipping large military forces with consistent, high-quality equipment. Archery equipment reached new levels of sophistication during the chariot period, with composite bow technology enabling unprecedented range and accuracy. Bronze arrowheads from warrior burials display specialized designs optimized for different tactical situations, including broad-headed hunting points, narrow bodkins for penetrating armor, and barbed military heads designed to inflict maximum damage. The quantity of arrows found in individual burials sometimes exceeds 100 specimens, indicating the central importance of archery in Bronze Age warfare. The fortified settlements that emerged during the period of Kourios expansion reflect the militarization of Indo-European society and the need for defensive measures against rival warrior bands. Sites like Archaeum and other Sintashta settlements feature sophisticated defensive systems including multiple concentric walls, protected gateways, and internal organization optimized for siege warfare. The circular layout of these settlements enabled coordinated defense, while the central areas provided protected space for chariot storage and warrior training. Archaeological evidence suggests that these fortifications successfully withstood prolonged sieges, with some sites showing evidence for multiple phases of destruction and reconstruction. The sacred oaths that bound Kourios members created relationships that transcended kinship ties and established new forms of social organization based on voluntary association and shared commitment. Comparative analysis of Indo-European oath formulas reveals common elements that likely derive from Proto-Indo-European practices. These ceremonies involved elaborate rituals designed to invoke divine witness and ensure supernatural punishment for oathbreakers. The participants shared blood, consumed ritual meals, and exchanged weapons or other objects that symbolized their mutual obligations and shared destiny. The Blood Brotherhood ceremonies that formalized Kourios relationships created artificial kinship ties that often prove stronger than biological family connections. Archaeological evidence for these practices includes paired burials featuring young males interred with matching weapon sets and identical grave goods. Some burials show evidence for simultaneous death, suggesting ritualized suicide pacts or shared deaths in battle that honored oath obligations. The elaborate nature of these interments indicates that blood brotherhood relationships received formal recognition and commanded significant respect within Indo-European society. The role of warrior bands in territorial expansion extended beyond simple military conquest to include the establishment of new settlements and the organization of conquered territories. Archaeological evidence suggests that Kourios groups served as advance forces that identified suitable territories, eliminated local resistance, and prepared regions for subsequent colonization by larger populations. The pattern of Bronze Age settlement across Europe shows clear evidence for this process, with fortified sites appearing along major river valleys and strategic passes before the establishment of larger agricultural communities. The integration of conquered populations into Indo-European society followed patterns that reflected the values and practices of warrior brotherhoods. Linguistic evidence suggests that local elites who submitted to Indo-European authority could be incorporated into existing social structures through adoption ceremonies and oath-taking rituals. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation, with some sites showing gradual transitions in material culture rather than complete replacement of existing traditions. The flexibility of Kourios institutions enabled the absorption of useful local practices while maintaining Indo-European cultural dominance. The religious practices associated with warrior brotherhoods emphasized the sanctification of violence and the transformation of warfare into religious duty. Reconstructed Proto-Indo-European mythology includes numerous accounts of divine warriors who served as models for human Kourios members. The god Marios, whose name appears in various forms across the Indo-European language family, represented the archetypal young warrior who achieved glory through martial prowess and died heroically in battle. Archaeological evidence for warrior cults includes specialized weapons deposited in ritual contexts, suggesting that bronze implements possess sacred as well as practical significance. The seasonal cycles that governed Koryos activities reflected the agricultural calendar and the availability of resources for military campaigns. Comparative evidence suggests that warrior bands operated most actively during late spring and summer months, when travel conditions favoured long-distance expeditions and adequate pasture supported large numbers of horses and cattle. Winter months were devoted to training, weapon maintenance, and the performance of religious ceremonies that maintained group cohesion and prepared members for the following campaign season. The legacy of Koryos institutions extended far beyond the Bronze Age to influence military organisation and warrior culture throughout Indo-European history. Germanic war bands, Celtic warrior societies, and Italic military brotherhoods all preserved elements that can be traced to Proto-Indo-European origins. The Roman military system incorporated oath-taking ceremonies, unit insignia, and disciplinary codes that reflected ancient warrior brotherhood traditions. Medieval knightly orders continued many of the same practices, including ritualized initiation, sacred oaths, and the sanctification of violence in service of religious and social ideals. The mountainous plateau of central Anatolia witnessed the emergence of the first historically documented Indo-European civilization, when waves of Anatolian-speaking peoples descended from the Pontic-Caspian steppes during the late 3rd millennium BC. These migrations, distinct from the later waves that would carry other Indo-European branches across Europe and into India, established a series of kingdoms that would dominate Near Eastern politics for over half a millennium. The Hittites, whose cuneiform archives provide our earliest written evidence of Indo-European languages, transformed from nomadic pastoralists into the masters of a sophisticated empire that challenged Egyptian hegemony and revolutionized ancient warfare through innovations in metallurgy, military organization, and diplomatic practice. Archaeological evidence from sites across central Anatolia reveals the gradual infiltration of Indo-European populations during the transition from the early to Middle Bronze Age. Excavations at Kultepe, ancient Kanesh, have uncovered Assyrian merchant archives dating to approximately 2000 to 1750 BC that document the presence of Indo-European personal names among local rulers and officials. These cuneiform tablets mention kings with names like Pitcairn and Anita, clearly Indo-European in origin, governing city-states that had previously been controlled by non-Indo-European Hattian populations. The linguistic analysis of these early documents demonstrates that Anatolian Indo-European languages had already begun diverging into distinct dialects, including Hittite, Luwian, and Palaic, suggesting that the initial migrations occurred several centuries earlier. The material culture associated with these early Anatolian Indo-Europeans displays clear connections to steppe traditions while adapting to local conditions and resources. Bronze weapons from sites like Alaka Hoyuk include battle axes and spearheads that preserve design elements traceable to Yamnaya prototypes, yet incorporate decorative motifs and manufacturing techniques derived from established Anatolian metalworking traditions. The pottery assemblages show similar patterns of cultural synthesis, with wheel-made vessels displaying shapes and firing techniques characteristic of local traditions while incorporating cord-mark decorations and geometric patterns that echo steppe ceramic styles. The establishment of Hittite political dominance began during the 17th century BC under kings whose names and deeds are preserved in later historical records. Hattusili I, ruling from the newly constructed capital at Hattusa, launched aggressive campaigns that extended Hittite control across central Anatolia and into northern Syria. His military successes depended heavily on innovations in bronze metallurgy that produced weapons of unprecedented effectiveness. Excavations at Hattusa have revealed extensive workshop areas where specialized smiths manufactured standardized weapon sets for royal armies. The bronze implements recovered from these contexts include long swords with complex hilting systems, reinforced spearheads designed for massed infantry formations, and battle axes featuring sophisticated weight distribution that maximized impact force. The reign of Masili I marked the zenith of early Hittite expansion, culminating in the audacious campaign that captured and sacked Babylon around 1595 BC. This extraordinary military achievement demonstrated the effectiveness of Hittite tactical innovations and the organisational capabilities that enabled campaigns across vast distances. The Babylonian expedition required coordination of supply lines extending over 1,000 kilometres, management of diverse military units including infantry, chariots and siege specialists, and diplomatic arrangements with allied states along the route of advance. Contemporary Mesopotamian sources describe the shock and devastation caused by Hittite forces, whose bronze weapons and disciplined formations overwhelmed traditional Near Eastern military systems. The development of horse-drawn chariot warfare reached its most sophisticated expression under Hittite military engineers who transformed these vehicles from simple transportation platforms into devastating weapon systems. Archaeological evidence from Hattusa includes chariot remains that demonstrate advanced understanding of weight distribution, structural reinforcement, and aerodynamic design. These vehicles featured lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for maximum speed and maneuverability, and specialised suspension systems that absorbed shocks during high-speed combat. The harness arrangements recovered from royal burials include elaborate bronze fittings that provided precise control over chariot teams while proclaiming the status and wealth of their owners. Hittite chariot tactics revolutionised Bronze Age warfare through the development of coordinated formations that combined shock assault with sustained combat capability. Cuneiform military manuals described training procedures for chariot crews that emphasised teamwork between drivers and fighters, standardised equipment maintenance, and tactical manoeuvres designed to maximise the psychological and physical impact of mass chariot charges. The effectiveness of these innovations is documented in Hittite royal annals that describe victories over Egyptian, Assyrian and Mesopotamian forces whose traditional military systems proved inadequate against coordinated chariot assaults supported by disciplined infantry formations. The metallurgical innovations that supported Hittite military supremacy extended beyond weapons production to include the development of ironworking techniques that would eventually transform ancient technology. Archaeological evidence from Hittite sites includes some of the earliest examples of deliberate iron production, with furnaces and slag deposits indicating systematic experimentation with iron ores and smelting procedures. While iron remained expensive and primarily ceremonial during the height of Hittite power, the technological knowledge accumulated during this period provided the foundation for later Iron Age developments that would spread throughout the ancient world. The diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Hittite royal archives reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations that rivaled contemporary civilizations in complexity and effectiveness. The Amarna letters include extensive correspondence between Hittite kings and their Egyptian counterparts, documenting negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and mutual defence pacts. These documents demonstrate that Hittite diplomats possessed detailed knowledge of Egyptian internal politics, military capabilities, and economic resources that enabled effective negotiation strategies. The language used in these diplomatic exchanges reflects formal protocols and ceremonial procedures that acknowledge the equal status of both kingdoms while protecting the interests of their respective rulers. The treaty between Hattusili III and Ramesses II, concluded around 1259 BC, represents one of the earliest documented examples of comprehensive international agreement between major powers. The terms preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphic and Hittite cuneiform versions establish mutual defence obligations, extradition procedures for political refugees, and commercial arrangements that facilitated trade between the two kingdoms. The elaborate oath ceremonies that formalised this agreement involved religious rituals designed to invoke divine enforcement of treaty obligations, reflecting sophisticated understanding of the supernatural sanctions that supported international law in the ancient world. Hittite conflicts with Assyrian expansion demonstrated the military effectiveness of Indo-European tactical innovations against traditional Near Eastern warfare systems. The Annals of Tiglath-Pileser I describe prolonged campaigns against Hittite successor states that required extraordinary efforts to overcome entrenched resistance. Assyrian sources acknowledge the superior quality of Hittite bronze weapons and the effectiveness of their defensive fortifications, while describing tactical adaptations necessary to counter chariot warfare and disciplined infantry formations. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Hittite-Assyrian frontier reveals extensive fortification systems that incorporated advanced engineering techniques, including multiple defensive walls, protected water sources, and specialized structures designed to shelter chariot forces during siege warfare. The linguistic evidence preserved in Hittite cuneiform archives provides crucial insights into early Indo-European grammar, vocabulary, and phonological development. The Hittite language preserves archaic features that had disappeared from other Indo-European branches by the time of their earliest attestation, including the laryngeal consonants that comparative linguists had hypothetically reconstructed for Proto-Indo-European. The discovery of these sounds in actual Hittite words confirmed theoretical predictions and revolutionized understanding of Indo-European phonological evolution. Hittite also preserves ancient grammatical categories, including a distinctive animate-inanimate gender system that differs from the masculine-feminine neuter pattern found in most other Indo-European languages. The extensive vocabulary preserved in Hittite texts illuminates numerous aspects of early Indo-European culture and society that would otherwise remain hypothetical reconstructions. Religious terminology includes words for sacrifice, ritual purity, and divine authority that provide direct evidence for Proto-Indo-European religious concepts. Military vocabulary encompasses detailed descriptions of weapons, tactical formations, and siege techniques that demonstrate the sophisticated warfare systems developed by early Indo-European societies. Agricultural and pastoral terms reveal the economic foundations of Hittite society, while preserving ancient Indo-European roots that appear across the language family in various forms. The administrative documents from Hittite archives reveal sophisticated governmental systems that combined Indo-European social organization with administrative techniques adapted from established Near Eastern civilizations. Palace records document complex hierarchies of officials responsible for military organization, religious ceremonies, agricultural management, and diplomatic correspondence. These bureaucratic systems enabled effective control over territories spanning hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, while maintaining cultural unity and military effectiveness. The integration of conquered populations followed patterns that preserved Indo-European political dominance while incorporating useful local practices and knowledge systems. The religious practices documented in Hittite ritual texts preserve numerous elements that can be traced to Proto-Indo-European origins, while demonstrating adaptation to Anatolian conditions and influences from neighbouring civilizations. The Hittite pantheon included both Indo-European deities whose names and functions correspond to gods worshipped by other Indo-European peoples and local Anatolian divinities who were incorporated into royal cult practices. Storm god worship occupied a central position in Hittite religion, with elaborate festivals and sacrificial ceremonies designed to ensure divine support for royal military campaigns and agricultural prosperity. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes at Hattusa reveals sophisticated architectural arrangements that accommodated large-scale religious ceremonies while providing secure storage for ritual implements and sacred texts. The decline of Hittite power during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC resulted from a combination of internal political instability, external military pressure, and broader regional disruptions associated with the Bronze Age collapse. Archaeological evidence from Hattusa shows clear signs of violent destruction around 1180 BC, with burned buildings, scattered artifacts, and evidence for hasty abandonment that suggests sudden catastrophic defeat. The cuneiform archives end abruptly during this period, providing no contemporary explanation for the kingdom's collapse. However, the broader pattern of destruction across Bronze Age sites throughout the Eastern Mediterranean suggests that Hittite civilization fell victim to the same forces that destroyed Mycenaean palaces, Canaanite cities, and other established Bronze Age centres. The legacy of Hittite civilization extended far beyond the political boundaries of their empire, through the transmission of technological innovations, diplomatic practices, and cultural traditions that influenced subsequent Near Eastern development. Ironworking techniques developed in Hittite workshops spread throughout Anatolia and beyond, providing the foundation for Iron Age civilizations that would dominate the region for centuries. The diplomatic protocols established in Hittite treaties influenced later international relations, while military innovations, including chariot warfare and siege techniques, were adopted by successor states throughout the ancient world. The preservation of Indo-European linguistic and cultural elements in later Anatolian populations demonstrates the lasting demographic impact of these early migrations that established the first historically documented Indo-European kingdom. The collapse of the Indus Valley civilization around 1900 BC created a demographic vacuum across the northwestern Indian subcontinent that would soon be filled by the most transformative migration in South Asian history. From the Central Asian steppes, where they had established sophisticated Bronze Age cultures centered on fortified settlements like Sintashta and Archaim, Indo-Aryan tribes began their southward movement through the mountain passes of Afghanistan and into the fertile river valleys of the Punjab. These migrations, occurring between approximately 1700 and 1200 BC, brought with them not merely new populations, but an entire cultural complex that would fundamentally reshape the religious, social, and linguistic landscape of the subcontinent for millennia to come. Archaeological evidence from sites like Perak in Baluchistan and Gandhara grave culture settlements in the Swat Valley reveals the material signature of these incoming populations. Excavations have uncovered distinctive handmade pottery featuring geometric designs that echo Central Asian ceramic traditions, bronze implements including horse bits and chariot fittings that demonstrate continuity with steppe technological innovations, and evidence for horse domestication in regions where these animals had previously been unknown. The site of Perak, occupied from approximately 1700 to 800 BC, provides a particularly clear sequence showing the gradual introduction of Indo-Aryan material culture alongside evidence for intensive agricultural development and the establishment of permanent settlements optimized for controlling strategic river crossings and trade routes. The Gandhara grave culture, distributed across modern-day northern Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan, represents the clearest archaeological manifestation of early Indo-Aryan presence in South Asia. The distinctive burial practices documented at sites like Timargara and Katalai feature pit graves containing flexed inhumations, accompanied by iron weapons, horse equipment, and pottery assemblages that display clear connections to Central Asian prototypes. These cemeteries, dating from approximately 1600 to 500 BC, reveal a warrior society that maintained many steppe traditions while adapting to subcontinental conditions. The grave goods include iron swords with ring-pommelled hilts characteristic of Central Asian weapon traditions, bronze horse bits identical to examples from Sintashta contexts, and ceramic vessels displaying cord-mark decorations that preserve ancient Indo-European ceramic techniques. The linguistic evidence preserved in the Rig Veda provides unparalleled insights into the worldview, social organisation, and religious practices of these early Indo-Aryan populations. Composed during the period between 1500 and 1000 BC, the Rigvedic hymns preserve archaic Sanskrit that retains numerous features, linking it directly to Proto-Indo-European linguistic traditions, while documenting the specific adaptations required for life in South Asian environments. The vocabulary relating to geography, climate, and natural phenomena reveals a population in the process of adapting steppe-derived cultural practices to monsoon agriculture, tropical diseases, and unfamiliar plant and animal species. Terms for specifically South Asian flora and fauna appear alongside preserved Indo-European roots for horses, cattle, and wheeled vehicles that maintain their central importance in Indo-Aryan society. The Rigvedic descriptions of warfare provide detailed accounts of the military technologies and tactical systems that enabled Indo-Aryan expansion across northern India. The hymns celebrate horse-drawn chariots as the decisive weapons that granted victory over indigenous populations, described as dasas and dasyas. These vehicles, termed ratha in Sanskrit, featured lightweight construction optimized for rapid movement across the plains of northern India. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hastinapura confirms the presence of spoked wheels and chariot fittings that match Rigvedic descriptions, while horse remains from stratified contexts demonstrate the systematic introduction of these animals into regions where they had been previously unknown. The tactical advantages provided by chariot warfare enabled relatively small Indo-Aryan forces to defeat larger indigenous armies that lacked equivalent mobility and striking power. The bronze and early iron weapons described in Rigvedic texts reflect technological traditions derived from Central Asian metallurgical innovations, while incorporating adaptations to local raw material availability and combat requirements. Archaeological assemblages from painted greyware sites across the Gangetic Plain include iron swords, spearheads, and arrowheads that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of iron working techniques. These implements display design features optimized for South Asian combat conditions, including longer blades suited to fighting in dense vegetation and specialized point configurations designed to penetrate the cotton armor favored by local populations. The standardization evident in weapon assemblages suggests organized production systems capable of equipping substantial military forces with consistent, high-quality equipment. The social organization documented in early Vedic texts reveals the gradual transformation of steppe tribal structures into the complex hierarchical systems that would characterize classical Indian civilization. The Varna system, as described in later Rigvedic hymns and early Brahmana texts, represents the institutionalization of Indo-European social categories adapted to South Asian conditions and the requirements of governing conquered populations. The Brahmana Varna preserved and adapted the religious specialists who had maintained sacred knowledge and ritual practices during the migrations from Central Asia. The Kshatriya class descended directly from the warrior brotherhoods that had spearheaded Indo-Aryan expansion, retaining their martial traditions while assuming territorial control and administrative responsibilities. The Vaishya category encompassed the broader Indo-Aryan population engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade activities that supported warrior elites and religious establishments. The incorporation of indigenous populations into Indo-Aryan social structures followed patterns that reflected both practical administrative requirements and deeply held beliefs about ritual purity and cultural superiority. The Shudravana, as described in later Vedic texts, provided a mechanism for integrating conquered populations while maintaining Indo-Aryan cultural dominance and ensuring access to local knowledge systems essential for successful agricultural adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests that this integration process varied considerably across different regions, with some areas showing gradual cultural synthesis, while others display evidence for more abrupt population replacement and cultural transformation. The religious practices preserved in Vedic literature demonstrate remarkable continuity with Proto-Indo-European traditions, while documenting adaptations to South Asian environmental conditions and cultural influences from indigenous populations. The fire sacrifice that formed the centerpiece of Vedic ritual represents a direct continuation of Indo-European sacrificial traditions, with elaborate ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic order and ensure divine support for human activities. The Agnikayana ritual, described in detail in later Vedic texts, required the construction of complex fire altars using precisely calculated numbers of bricks arranged in specific geometric patterns that symbolize cosmic structure and divine authority. The horse sacrifice described in Rigvedic and later texts represents the most elaborate expression of Indo-Aryan royal ritual, combining ancient steppe traditions of horse sacrifice with sophisticated ceremonial procedures adapted to subcontinental political requirements. This year-long ceremony began with the release of a specially consecrated stallion that wandered freely across territories claimed by the sponsoring king. Any ruler whose lands the horse entered faced the choice of submission or warfare, making the Ashvamedha both a religious ceremony and a mechanism for territorial expansion. The ritual culminated in the sacrifice of the horse, alongside elaborate offerings that demonstrated the king's wealth and divine authorization, while establishing his authority over conquered territories. The Soma ritual, central to numerous Rigvedic hymns, preserved ancient Indo-European traditions of ritual intoxication while adapting to South Asian plant resources and religious requirements. The identity of the original Soma plant remains disputed, but linguistic and botanical evidence suggests that Indo-Aryan populations were forced to find substitutes for Central Asian psychoactive plants that could not survive in South Asian climates. The elaborate preparation procedures described in Vedic texts, involving pressing, filtering, and mixing with milk and honey, created ceremonial beverages that induced altered states of consciousness, essential for communication with divine powers. Archaeological evidence from fire altar sites includes specialized vessels and implements that match descriptions of Soma preparation equipment found in ritual texts. The pantheon worshipped by early Indo-Aryan populations combined deities whose names and functions can be traced directly to Proto-Indo-European origins, with adaptations reflecting South Asian environmental conditions and possible influences from indigenous religious traditions. Indra, the storm god who served as king of the gods and patron of warriors, represents a direct continuation of the Indo-European storm deity, while acquiring specific characteristics related to monsoon weather patterns and the military requirements of subcontinental conquest. Rigvedic hymns describe Indra's battles against the demon Vritra, who withheld the monsoon rains, reflecting the central importance of seasonal rainfall for South Asian agriculture and the role of royal authority in ensuring agricultural prosperity. Agni, the fire god who served as mediator between human and divine realms, preserved ancient Indo-European fire worship while developing elaborate theological concepts related to sacrifice and cosmic maintenance. The Rigvedic conception of Agni as simultaneously the domestic hearth fire, the sacrificial fire, and the celestial fire that enables divine communication demonstrates sophisticated religious thinking that built upon Indo-European foundations while addressing South Asian ritual requirements. Archaeological evidence for fire altars at sites across northern India confirms the central importance of fire worship in early Indo-Aryan religious practice, with some installations showing evidence for continuous use over centuries. Varuna, described in early Rigvedic hymns as the sovereign god who maintains cosmic order through divine law, represents another clear continuation of Indo-European religious concepts while acquiring characteristics specific to South Asian kingship ideologies. The elaborate royal ceremonials described in later Vedic texts, including the Rajasuya and Vayapaya sacrifices, demonstrate the development of sophisticated theories of divine kingship that legitimized Indo-Aryan political authority, while incorporating administrative techniques necessary for governing complex agricultural societies. The agricultural adaptations required for successful Indo-Aryan settlement in South Asia involved substantial modifications of steppe pastoral practices, while preserving the cattle-centered economy that had characterized Indo-European society since Proto-Indo-European times. The Rigvedic emphasis on cattle wealth, with cows serving as the primary measure of prosperity and social status, maintained ancient traditions while adapting to South Asian conditions, where these animals could be integrated with monsoon agriculture and rice cultivation. Archaeological evidence from painted greyware sites reveals the development of mixed farming systems that combined cattle herding with intensive grain production, creating agricultural surpluses that supported urban development and craft specialization. The ironworking technology that enabled Indo-Aryan agricultural expansion built upon metallurgical knowledge acquired during the Central Asian phase of their cultural development, while incorporating innovations necessary for producing tools suited to South Asian agricultural requirements. Archaeological assemblages from early Iron Age sites across northern India include ploughshares, sickles, and other agricultural implements that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of ironworking techniques. The standardization evident in these tool assemblages suggests organized production systems that could supply agricultural communities across vast territories with consistent, high-quality equipment essential for intensive farming. The urban centers that emerged during the later Vedic period reflect the successful adaptation of Indo-Aryan social and political organization to South Asian conditions, while preserving essential cultural traditions derived from steppe origins. Sites like Hastinapura and Ahijhatra reveal planned settlements featuring defensive fortifications, specialized craft quarters, and monumental architecture that proclaimed the authority and prosperity of Indo-Aryan rulers. The archaeological evidence from these urban centres includes extensive workshops for bronze and iron production, pottery manufacturing facilities capable of producing the distinctive painted grey ware that characterises later Vedic material culture, and storage facilities that demonstrate the agricultural surpluses necessary to support non-agricultural populations. The trade networks that connected early Indo-Aryan settlements extended across vast distances, linking South Asian populations with Central Asian, Iranian, and Mesopotamian commercial systems, while facilitating the exchange of raw materials, finished goods, and technological innovations. Archaeological evidence includes Central Asian horses, Afghan lapis lazuli, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals found in South Asian contexts, while South Asian ivory, textiles, and spices appear in sites across Western and Central Asia. These commercial relationships required sophisticated organisational capabilities and diplomatic arrangements that demonstrate the political and economic sophistication achieved by Indo-Aryan societies within centuries of their initial arrival in the subcontinent. The linguistic developments that occurred during the early centuries of Indo-Aryan presence in South Asia resulted in the emergence of Sanskrit as a literary language capable of preserving and transmitting complex religious, legal, and philosophical concepts across generations. The grammatical sophistication, evident in even the earliest Vedic texts, demonstrates rapid adaptation of Indo-European linguistic structures to South Asian cultural requirements while maintaining essential features that link Sanskrit to its Central Asian origins. The development of sophisticated oral transmission techniques enabled the preservation of vast quantities of religious and cultural knowledge without written records, creating educational systems that would influence South Asian intellectual development for millennia. The military innovations that enabled continued Indo-Aryan expansion beyond their initial strongholds in the Punjab involved adaptations of steppe warfare techniques to South Asian terrain and tactical requirements. The development of elephant warfare, documented in later Vedic and post-Vedic texts, represents a significant tactical innovation that combined Indo-Aryan organisational capabilities with South Asian animal resources to create military systems capable of defeating both indigenous resistance and rival Indo-Aryan kingdoms. Archaeological evidence for elephant use in warfare includes specialised equipment and architectural features designed to accommodate these animals in military contexts, demonstrating the successful integration of local resources with imported tactical concepts. The emergence of Celtic civilization from its Hallstatt culture foundations around 800 BC mark the beginning of one of the most dynamic and far-reaching expansions in European prehistory. From their heartland in the alpine regions of modern Austria, southern Germany, and eastern France, Celtic tribes embarked on migrations that would carry their distinctive culture, languages, and warrior traditions across vast territories stretching from the Atlantic shores of Ireland to the steppes of Asia Minor. These movements represented not merely demographic shifts, but the transmission of a sophisticated cultural complex that combined advanced metallurgy, elaborate artistic traditions, and religious practices rooted in ancient Indo-European heritage. Archaeological evidence from the Hallstatt cemetery itself, with its over 2,000 burials spanning several centuries, reveals the material foundations that enabled subsequent Celtic expansion. The salt mining operations that provided the economic basis for Hallstatt prosperity generated wealth sufficient to support specialised craftsmen, maintain extensive trade networks, and equip warrior elites with bronze and early iron weapons of exceptional quality. Excavations have uncovered elaborate grave goods, including bronze vessels imported from Mediterranean workshops, amber ornaments from Baltic sources, and locally produced iron swords that demonstrate the metallurgical expertise that would become characteristic of Celtic civilization. The hierarchical burial patterns evident at Hallstatt, with wealthy warrior graves containing full weapon sets and imported luxury goods contrasting sharply with simpler interments, establish social structures that would persist throughout the period of Celtic expansion. The transition from Hallstatt to Latini culture around 450 BC coincided with accelerated Celtic migrations and the development of distinctive artistic styles that would become synonymous with Celtic civilization. Named after the votive deposit site on Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland, Latène culture represented a synthesis of indigenous European traditions with influences absorbed through contact with Mediterranean civilizations and continuing connections to steppe nomadic peoples. The artistic revolution that characterized early Latène period involved the transformation of classical Mediterranean motifs through Celtic aesthetic sensibilities, creating curvilinear designs, stylized animal forms, and geometric patterns that decorated weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial objects with unprecedented sophistication. The metalworking innovations that distinguished Latène craftsmen built upon Hallstatt foundations while incorporating techniques learned through expanded trade contacts and territorial conquests. Iron production reached new levels of sophistication, with Celtic smiths developing specialised techniques for creating pattern-welded sword blades that combined different iron alloys to produce weapons of exceptional strength and flexibility. Archaeological analysis of Latène swords reveals complex manufacturing processes involving repeated folding and welding of iron bars with varying carbon content, creating blades with hard cutting edges supported by flexible cores that prevented breakage during combat. The decorative inlay work that adorned the finest weapons incorporated bronze, silver and gold elements arranged in intricate patterns that proclaimed the status and achievements of their owners. Celtic expansion into the Italian peninsula during the 5th and 4th centuries BC brought these warrior societies into direct conflict with emerging Roman power, while demonstrating the military effectiveness of their tactical innovations and organisational systems. The migration of Gallic tribes across the Alps around 400 BC established Celtic settlements throughout the Po Valley and central Italy, creating a permanent Celtic presence that would influence Italian development for centuries. Archaeological evidence from sites like Monte Bibele reveals Celtic settlements featuring distinctive material culture, including Latène weaponry, characteristic pottery styles, and burial practices that maintain traditions derived from transalpine origins while adapting to Italian conditions. The sack of Rome in 387 BC by Gallic forces under Brennus represented the most dramatic demonstration of Celtic military capabilities and the shock effect of their warrior culture on Mediterranean civilizations. Contemporary accounts describe the terror inspired by Celtic warriors whose appearance, tactics, and battle fury differed radically from conventional Mediterranean military traditions. The Gauls who descended upon Rome fought with long iron swords designed for slashing attacks, carried distinctive shields decorated with Latène artistic motifs, and employed psychological warfare techniques including war cries, horn blasts, and ritual displays designed to demoralize enemies before combat commenced. The ease with which these forces overwhelmed Roman defences and occupied the city demonstrated the superiority of Celtic military technology and organisation over traditional Italian warfare systems. The Celtic warrior culture that enabled such dramatic military successes combined individual prowess with sophisticated organisational structures derived from ancient Indo-European traditions. Archaeological evidence from warrior burials reveals the equipment and status symbols associated with Celtic military elites, including elaborately decorated swords, spears with ornamental bronze fittings, and shields reinforced with iron bosses and decorative metalwork. The standardization evident in weapon assemblages suggests its organized production systems capable of equipping substantial military forces, while the presence of imported materials and foreign-influenced designs demonstrates the international scope of Celtic military networks. The warrior bands that spearheaded Celtic expansion preserved many characteristics of the ancient Koreos brotherhoods, while adapting to the specific requirements of territorial conquest and settlement. Celtic sources describe young warriors who lived apart from settled communities, engaging in cattle raiding, territorial warfare, and ritualized combat that served both military and religious functions. The archaeological record provides evidence for these practices through the recovery of votive deposits containing weapons, armour, and personal ornaments sacrificed at sacred sites associated with warrior cults. Sites like Laten itself have yielded hundreds of weapons deposited in watery contexts, suggesting elaborate ceremonies designed to honour war gods and commemorate military achievements. The Druids who served as the intellectual and religious elite of Celtic society preserved extensive oral traditions that maintained connections to ancient Indo-European legal, religious, and astronomical knowledge, while adapting these traditions to Celtic cultural requirements. Classical sources describe druidical education systems that required decades of memorization to master the vast corpus of laws, genealogies, religious formulas, and natural philosophy that constituted Celtic higher learning. The absence of written records for religious and legal matters reflected deliberate policy designed to maintain druidical authority while preserving the flexibility necessary for adapting ancient traditions to changing circumstances. The legal traditions preserved by druidical schools demonstrate clear connections to Indo-European jurisprudential concepts, while incorporating innovations necessary for governing complex agricultural societies and managing relationships between diverse tribal groups. Celtic law codes, as reconstructed from later Irish and Welsh sources, emphasised compensation rather than punishment for most offences, with elaborate systems for calculating appropriate payments based on the social status of victims and perpetrators. The emphasis on oath-taking, ritual guarantees, and supernatural sanctions for legal violations preserved ancient Indo-European concepts, while providing practical mechanisms for maintaining order in societies that lacked centralised governmental authority. The astronomical knowledge maintained by druidical scholars enabled the construction of sophisticated calendrical systems that coordinated religious ceremonies, agricultural activities, and legal proceedings according to celestial observations. The Coligny calendar, discovered in fragments in eastern France, reveals the complexity of Celtic temporal calculations, with intercalation systems designed to maintain synchronization between lunar and solar cycles over extended periods. This bronze tablet, inscribed with abbreviated Latin letters but preserving Celtic linguistic and conceptual structures, demonstrates the sophisticated mathematical and observational capabilities that enabled Celtic societies to coordinate activities across vast territories without centralised administrative systems. The religious practices documented in Celtic sources preserve numerous elements traceable to Proto-Indo-European origins, while demonstrating adaptations to specific regional conditions and cultural influences absorbed through territorial expansion. The pantheon worshipped by Celtic populations included deities whose names and functions correspond to gods venerated by other Indo-European peoples, while incorporating local divinities associated with specific territories, natural features, and tribal identities. Lugh, the multi-skilled god associated with craftsmanship, warfare, and sovereignty, appears throughout the Celtic world with variations in name and specific attributes that reflect local adaptations of common mythological themes. The elaborate festivals that structured the Celtic religious calendar combined ancient seasonal celebrations with ceremonies designed to maintain tribal identity and reinforce social hierarchies. Samhain, marking the beginning of the Celtic year and the transition from the harvest season to winter, involved rituals that opened communication between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, enabling consultation with ancestral spirits and divine powers. Archaeological evidence for these ceremonies includes specialised ritual deposits, temporary structures associated with seasonal gatherings, and evidence for large-scale feasting that brought together populations from extensive territories for religious and social activities. The warrior cult practices that formed an integral component of Celtic religion emphasised the sanctification of violence and the achievement of immortal glory through heroic death in battle. Votive deposits at sites throughout the Celtic world include weapons, armour, and personal ornaments sacrificed to war gods in ceremonies that combine thanksgiving for military victories with requests for future success. The heads of defeated enemies, preserved and displayed in temples and private dwellings, served both as trophies proclaiming martial prowess and as ritual objects believed to possess supernatural powers that protected their captors from harm. The expansion of Celtic populations into the British Isles beginning around 500 BC established cultural patterns that would persist for centuries while demonstrating the adaptability of Celtic institutions to diverse environmental and cultural conditions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Danebury and Maiden Castle reveals the development of hill forts featuring sophisticated defensive systems, specialised craft areas, and evidence for social stratification that maintained continental Celtic characteristics while incorporating influences from indigenous British populations. The material culture from these sites includes latten metalwork, distinctive pottery styles, and burial practices that demonstrate cultural continuity with continental origins, while showing adaptations to British conditions. The Celtic settlements established in Ireland preserved many archaic features that had disappeared from continental Celtic culture through contact with Mediterranean civilizations and pressure from Roman expansion. The archaeological record from sites like Navan Fort and the Hill of Tara reveals monumental architecture, elaborate artistic traditions, and evidence for social organisation that maintained characteristics traceable to early Celtic culture while developing distinctive Irish variations. The absence of Roman conquest in Ireland enabled the preservation of Celtic legal, religious and social institutions that provide crucial insights into pre-Roman Celtic civilization. The Atlantic coastal regions that marked the western limit of Celtic expansion developed distinctive cultural traditions that combined Celtic institutional frameworks with adaptations to maritime environments and resources. The archaeological evidence from sites along the coasts of Brittany, Cornwall, Wales and Western Ireland reveals societies that maintained Celtic linguistic and cultural identity while developing specialised technologies for ocean navigation, fishing and coastal agriculture. The megalithic monuments that characterise many Atlantic regions show evidence for continued use and modification during the Celtic period, suggesting the integration of ancient sacred sites into Celtic religious practices. The artistic achievements of Latini craftsmen reached their most sophisticated expression in the production of ceremonial objects that combined functional requirements with elaborate decorative programs designed to proclaim the status and achievements of their owners. The bronze mirrors, torques, and ceremonial weapons recovered from elite burials display technical mastery of complex manufacturing techniques, including repoussé work, engraving, and inlay that required years of specialised training to master. The iconographic programs that decorated these objects incorporated mythological scenes, symbolic representations of natural forces, and abstract geometric patterns that conveyed complex meanings comprehensible to educated members of Celtic society. The shield decorations that adorned Celtic warriors combined protective functions with elaborate artistic programs that identified tribal affiliations, proclaimed individual achievements, and invoked supernatural protection during combat. The Battersea shield, recovered from the Thames and dating to the 1st century BC, exemplifies the sophisticated metalworking techniques and artistic sensibilities that characterised late Latenna period craftsmanship. The bronze facing features elaborate repoussé work, creating raised bosses and flowing curvilinear designs that demonstrate mastery of both technical and aesthetic aspects of Celtic decorative arts. The torques that served as symbols of elite status throughout the Celtic world combined ancient Indo-European traditions of neck ornaments with distinctively Celtic artistic interpretations and manufacturing techniques. These twisted metal collars, crafted from gold, silver or bronze according to the status and wealth of their owners, required sophisticated understanding of metallurgy and jewellery-making techniques. The great torque from Snettisham, weighing over 1 kilogram of gold and silver alloy, demonstrates the resources and technical capabilities available to Celtic craftsmen, while serving as a symbol of royal or divine authority that connected earthly rulers with supernatural powers. The weapons that equipped Celtic warriors evolved continuously throughout the period of expansion, incorporating technological innovations while maintaining distinctive stylistic characteristics that proclaimed Celtic cultural identity. The longswords that became synonymous with Celtic warfare featured blades optimized for slashing attacks, with complex hilting systems that provided secure grip while accommodating elaborate decorative programs. Archaeological analysis reveals the sophisticated metallurgical techniques employed in their manufacture, including selective hardening of cutting edges, pattern welding of blade cores, and decorative inlay work that created weapons of both practical effectiveness and symbolic significance. The spears that served as primary weapons for most Celtic warriors combined functional effectiveness with opportunities for artistic expression through decorated bronze fittings and elaborate shaft decorations. The variety of spearpoint designs reveals adaptation to different tactical requirements, with some examples optimized for thrusting attacks in close combat, while others featured barbed or hooked configurations designed to disable enemy shields and armour. The bronze butt spikes that balanced these weapons often received decorative treatment equal to the spear points themselves, creating complete weapon systems that functioned as both practical implements and status symbols. The shield walls that protected Celtic warriors found their most formidable challengers in the Germanic tribes emerging from the forests and marshlands of northern Europe during the final centuries BC. These peoples, descendants of Indo-European populations who had settled in Scandinavia and the North European plain during the Bronze Age, developed military traditions and social institutions that would prove decisive in reshaping the political landscape of late antiquity. The archaeological record from sites like Hjortspring in Denmark and Illarupadal reveals sophisticated warrior cultures that combined ancient Indo-European traditions with innovations adapted to the harsh northern environment and the tactical requirements of forest warfare. The material culture recovered from Germanic settlements demonstrates technological sophistication that rivaled contemporary Celtic and Roman achievements, while maintaining distinctive characteristics that proclaim Germanic cultural identity. Excavations at sites like Feddersenweerde in Lower Saxony have uncovered longhouses measuring up to 30 metres in length, featuring sophisticated post and beam construction techniques that could support substantial roofs while accommodating extended families, their livestock, and stored provisions under single structures. These buildings incorporated advanced drainage systems, specialised areas for metalworking and textile production, and storage facilities that enabled communities to survive extended periods of isolation during harsh winters or military campaigns. The ironworking capabilities that equipped Germanic warriors built upon metallurgical knowledge acquired through contact with Celtic smiths, while developing distinctive techniques adapted to local ore sources and tactical requirements. Archaeological analysis of weapons from bog deposits like Niedema and Vermoes reveals manufacturing processes that produced iron blades of exceptional quality through controlled forging techniques, selective hardening of cutting edges, and pattern welding that created distinctive visual effects while enhancing structural integrity. Germanic smiths developed specialised techniques for producing seax knives, Francisca throwing axes, and long spears that became characteristic weapons of Germanic warfare, each optimised for specific tactical situations encountered in forest combat and siege operations. The Confederation systems that enabled Germanic military effectiveness combined traditional tribal structures with innovations necessary for coordinating large-scale military operations across extensive territories. The Cimbrian Teutones, whose migrations terrorized Roman territories during the late 2nd century BC, demonstrated organizational capabilities that enabled hundreds of thousands of warriors, along with their families and livestock, to move coherently across vast distances while maintaining military discipline and logistical support. Archaeological evidence from temporary camps and battle sites reveals sophisticated understanding of field fortification, supply management, and tactical coordination that enabled these massive population movements to operate effectively against Roman military opposition. The runic writing system that emerged among Germanic populations during the early centuries AD represented a revolutionary development that enabled the preservation of religious formulas, legal codes, and historical records in written form, while maintaining the oral traditions that had previously served these functions. The earliest runic inscriptions, found on weapons, jewellery and stone monuments throughout Scandinavia and Germanic territories, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of the relationship between spoken language and written symbols, while preserving distinctively Germanic linguistic characteristics that differentiated these populations from their Celtic and Roman neighbours. The Nagao helmet inscription, dating to the 2nd century BC, provides some of the earliest evidence for Germanic literacy, with runic characters spelling what appears to be a religious formula or magical incantation designed to protect the wearer during combat. The religious significance of runic writing extended beyond simple communication to encompass beliefs about the supernatural power inherent in written symbols themselves. Germanic sources describe runes as divine gifts that enabled communication with supernatural forces while providing magical protection and the ability to influence natural phenomena. Archaeological evidence supports these beliefs through the recovery of runic amulets, weapon inscriptions invoking divine protection, and memorial stones that served both commemorative and ritual functions. The standardization of runic forms across vast Germanic territories suggests coordinated transmission of this writing system through religious or military networks that maintained cultural unity despite political fragmentation. The cosmological concepts preserved in Germanic runic inscriptions and later literary sources demonstrate remarkable continuity with Proto-Indo-European religious traditions, while incorporating adaptations specific to Northern European environmental conditions and cultural requirements. The world tree that served as the axis connecting different cosmic realms appears in numerous Germanic contexts, from the Great Ash Yggdrasil described in Scandinavian sources to the sacred groves that served as religious centres for continental Germanic tribes. Archaeological evidence for tree worship includes votive deposits at sacred springs and groves, specialised ritual implements associated with tree cults, and artistic representations of cosmic trees on metalwork and stone monuments. The pantheon worshipped by Germanic populations combined deities whose names and functions correspond to gods venerated throughout the Indo-European world, with distinctively Germanic characteristics that reflected Northern European conditions and warrior culture requirements. Wodan, the one-eyed god associated with warfare, wisdom and death, preserved ancient Indo-European concepts of divine sovereignty while acquiring specific attributes related to Germanic military practices and shamanic traditions. Archaeological evidence for Wodan worship includes weapon sacrifices at bog sites, specialised ritual deposits, and artistic representations that demonstrate the central importance of this deity in Germanic religious practice. Donar, the thunder god whose hammer Mjolnir protected both gods and humans from supernatural threats, represented Germanic adaptation of the Indo-European storm deity to Northern European conditions, while maintaining essential characteristics that linked this god to thunder deities worshipped throughout the Indo-European world. The miniature hammer amulets, recovered from Germanic burial sites, demonstrate the widespread veneration of this deity while providing protection for their wearers through supernatural means. The association of Donar with oak trees, reflected in numerous sacred groves throughout Germanic territory, preserved ancient Indo-European tree worship while adapting these practices to the forest environments that characterised Germanic homelands. The warrior culture that dominated Germanic society preserved many characteristics of the ancient Koreos tradition, while adapting to the specific requirements of forest warfare and the political conditions that prevailed in northern Europe during the late pre-Roman and early Roman periods. The comitatus bands described in Tacitus and other classical sources combined young warriors under the leadership of established war chiefs, who provided equipment, training, and opportunities for martial glory in exchange for absolute loyalty and military service. Archaeological evidence for these institutions includes group burials featuring multiple warriors interred with matching weapon sets, specialised training grounds associated with major settlements, and votive deposits that commemorated the achievements of warrior brotherhoods. The initiation ceremonies that transformed young Germanic males into warriors involved elaborate rituals designed to separate initiates from civilian society, while binding them to their military companions through shared ordeals and supernatural sanctions. Comparative evidence from later Scandinavian sources describes ceremonies involving ritual death and rebirth, the assumption of animal characteristics, and oath-taking procedures that created artificial kinship relationships stronger than biological family ties. Archaeological evidence supports these practices through this recovery of ritual masks, specialised weapons associated with initiation ceremonies, and burial practices that suggest beliefs about warrior transformation and supernatural protection. The berserker traditions that characterised elite Germanic warriors preserved ancient Indo-European shape-shifting beliefs, while developing distinctive practices adapted to Germanic religious concepts and tactical requirements. These warriors, described in classical and medieval sources as fighting in trance states that rendered them immune to pain and fear, employed psychological conditioning techniques combined with ritual preparations that enabled extraordinary feats of combat effectiveness. Archaeological evidence includes bear and wolf claws found in warrior graves, specialised weapons associated with berserker practices, and artistic representations that demonstrate the reality of these warrior transformations. The migration period that began during the 3rd century AD resulted from a complex combination of climate change, population pressure, and political instability that created conditions favouring large-scale population movements throughout northern and central Europe. Archaeological evidence from abandoned settlements in Scandinavia and northern Germany reveals the gradual depopulation of marginal agricultural areas as deteriorating climate conditions made farming increasingly difficult while forcing populations to seek more favourable territories. The Fimbulwinter described in later Germanic sources may preserve memories of particularly severe climatic episodes that triggered major population displacements and contributed to the breakdown of established political arrangements. The Goths, who initiated the first major Germanic incursions into Roman territory during the 3rd century, demonstrated organisational capabilities and military effectiveness that enabled relatively small populations to establish control over vast territories while maintaining cultural identity and political independence. Archaeological evidence from Gothic settlements in the Black Sea region reveals sophisticated material culture that combined Germanic traditions with influences absorbed through contact with Roman, Sarmatian, and other populations encountered during their migrations. The Sintana de Muris Cherniakov culture, associated with Gothic presence, features distinctive pottery styles, metalworking traditions, and burial practices that demonstrate cultural synthesis while maintaining Germanic characteristics. The military innovations that enabled Gothic success against Roman forces included the development of heavy cavalry formations that combined Germanic warrior traditions with tactical concepts learned through contact with steppe nomadic peoples. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and burial sites reveals the adoption of longer swords, specialised lance points, and horse equipment that enabled effective mounted combat, while maintaining the infantry capabilities that had traditionally characterised Germanic warfare. The standardisation evident in Gothic weapon assemblages suggests organised production systems and military training programmes that created professional fighting forces capable of sustained campaigns against Roman armies. The Vandals, whose migrations carried them across vast territories from their Scandinavian origins, to eventual settlement in North Africa demonstrated the adaptability of Germanic political and military institutions to diverse environmental conditions and cultural encounters. Archaeological evidence from Vandal sites across Central Europe reveals gradual cultural changes that reflected adaptation to different climatic conditions, agricultural systems, and political requirements while maintaining essential Germanic characteristics. The material culture associated with Vandal presence includes distinctive pottery styles, metalworking traditions, and burial practices that demonstrate cultural continuity despite extensive territorial movements and cultural contacts. The naval capabilities that enabled Vandal control of the Western Mediterranean built upon Germanic shipbuilding traditions, while incorporating innovations learned through contact with Roman and other maritime peoples. Archaeological evidence from ship burials and harbour sites reveals sophisticated understanding of naval architecture, navigation techniques, and maritime warfare that enabled Germanic populations to operate effectively in marine environments despite their continental origins. The Vandal fleets that dominated Mediterranean shipping during the 5th century represented the culmination of technological and organisational developments that transformed Germanic warrior bands into effective naval forces. The Franks who established lasting kingdoms in Gaul demonstrated the successful adaptation of Germanic political institutions to the requirements of governing settled agricultural populations while maintaining warrior culture traditions that ensured military effectiveness. Archaeological evidence from Frankish cemeteries reveals the gradual evolution of material culture that combined Germanic traditions with influences absorbed through contact with Roman and Celtic populations. The weapon assemblages from elite Frankish burials include Francisca throwing axes, long swords, and specialised spear points that maintain Germanic characteristics while incorporating innovations adapted to changing tactical requirements. The legal traditions preserved in Frankish law codes demonstrate the successful integration of Germanic customary law with Roman legal concepts, while maintaining essential characteristics that reflected Germanic social organisation and cultural values. The Salic law and other Germanic legal codes preserved ancient Indo-European jurisprudential concepts, including compensation systems, oath-taking procedures, and ordeal mechanisms, while adapting these traditions to the requirements of governing complex agricultural societies that included diverse populations with different legal traditions. The Anglo-Saxon migrations that established Germanic kingdoms in Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries created cultural syntheses that combined continental Germanic traditions with adaptations to British conditions and influences from Romano-British and Celtic populations. Archaeological evidence from Anglo-Saxon cemeteries reveals distinctive burial practices that maintained Germanic characteristics while incorporating local influences and innovations. The weapon assemblages from sites like Sutton Hoo demonstrate the continuation of Germanic warrior culture traditions while showing evidence for cultural synthesis and artistic innovation that created distinctively Anglo-Saxon material culture. The Lombards, whose migrations carried them from Scandinavian origins to eventual settlement in Italy, demonstrated the persistence of Germanic cultural identity despite extensive territorial movements and prolonged contact with diverse populations. Archaeological evidence from Lombard sites across Central Europe and Italy reveals gradual cultural changes that reflected adaptation to different environmental conditions and political requirements while maintaining essential Germanic characteristics. The material culture associated with Lombard presence includes distinctive metalwork, pottery styles, and burial practices that demonstrate cultural continuity despite extensive cultural contacts and territorial changes. The administrative systems that enabled Germanic kingdoms to govern conquered territories combined traditional tribal institutions with innovations necessary for managing complex agricultural societies and maintaining relationships with Roman administrative structures. The development of written law codes, standardized coinage, and bureaucratic procedures demonstrated the adaptability of Germanic political institutions while preserving essential characteristics that reflected Germanic social organization and cultural values. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals sophisticated organisational capabilities that enabled effective governance of diverse populations across extensive territories. The religious transformations that accompanied Germanic expansion included both the preservation of traditional beliefs and practices and the gradual adoption of Christianity that created cultural syntheses combining Germanic and Christian elements. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the continued importance of traditional Germanic religious practices while showing evidence for Christian influence and eventual conversion. The artistic traditions that developed during this period combined Germanic decorative motifs with Christian iconographic programs that created distinctive cultural expressions, reflecting the synthesis of different religious traditions. The technological innovations that characterized the migration period included advances in metallurgy, agricultural techniques, and military equipment that enabled Germanic populations to adapt successfully to diverse environmental conditions while maintaining military effectiveness. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued development of ironworking techniques, the adoption of new agricultural tools and methods, and innovations in weapons and armour that reflected changing tactical requirements and available resources. The standardization evident in many technological developments suggests coordinated transmission of knowledge through trade networks, military alliances, and cultural exchanges that connected Germanic populations across vast territories. The collapse of the Lombard kingdom marked not the end, but rather a transformation of Germanic influence in European affairs, as the political vacuum created opportunities for other Indo-European peoples to assert their dominance over Mediterranean civilization. Among these, none would prove more consequential than the Greeks, whose emergence from the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC initiated a cultural revolution that would establish the intellectual foundations of Western civilization, while demonstrating the continued vitality of Indo-European warrior traditions adapted to maritime environments and urban political structures. The Mycenaean civilization that flourished between 1600 and 1100 BC represented the first flowering of Greek Indo-European culture, establishing patterns of political organisation, religious practice, and military technology that would influence subsequent Greek development for centuries. Archaeological excavations at sites like Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae itself have revealed sophisticated palace complexes featuring massive stone fortifications, elaborate throne rooms, and extensive administrative quarters that coordinated agricultural production, craft specialisation, and military operations across territories spanning hundreds of square kilometres. The linear B tablets recovered from these sites provide direct evidence for early Greek language and society, documenting a bureaucratic system that managed complex economic activities while maintaining the warrior aristocracies that dominated Mycenaean political structures. The administrative records preserved in Linear B script reveal a society organised around powerful kings who controlled vast agricultural estates worked by dependent populations, while maintaining professional military forces equipped with bronze weapons and horse-drawn chariots. The palace at Pylos administered over 200 settlements scattered across the southwestern Peloponnese, with detailed records documenting livestock inventories, land tenure arrangements, and tribute obligations that supported royal households, numbering in the thousands. The military equipment listed in these archives includes bronze armour sets, chariot wheels and fittings, and specialised weapons that demonstrate continuity with earlier Indo-European military traditions, while showing adaptations to Mediterranean combat conditions and siege warfare requirements. The religious practices documented in Linear B texts preserve numerous elements traceable to Proto-Indo-European origins, while demonstrating adaptations to Greek environmental conditions and cultural synthesis with pre-Indo-European Mediterranean traditions. The pantheon worshipped at Mycenaean sites included deities whose names correspond directly to classical Greek gods, including Poseidon, Zeus, Hera and Athena, indicating remarkable continuity in religious traditions, despite the cultural disruptions that mark the transition from Bronze to Iron Age. The elaborate religious festivals described in palace records involved massive animal sacrifices, processions featuring hundreds of participants, and ceremonies that required coordination between multiple settlements and specialized religious personnel. The collapse of Mycenaean civilization around 1100 BC resulted from a combination of internal political instability, external military pressure, and broader regional disruptions associated with the Bronze Age collapse that affected civilization throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence from major Mycenaean sites reveals clear signs of violent destruction, with burned palaces, scattered artifacts, and evidence for hasty abandonment that suggests sudden catastrophic defeat rather than gradual decline. The Linear B archives end abruptly during this period, while material culture shows dramatic simplification that indicates the breakdown of specialized craft production, long-distance trade networks, and centralized political authority. The Dark Age that followed Mycenaean collapse lasted approximately 3 centuries, during which Greek populations maintained their linguistic and cultural identity while adapting to drastically reduced material conditions and political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the persistence of Greek religious practices, burial customs, and technological traditions despite the absence of monumental architecture, written records, and the luxury goods that characterized Mycenaean civilization. Ironworking technology, probably introduced through contact with Anatolian populations, gradually replaced bronze production while enabling the manufacture of more effective weapons and agricultural tools that supported population recovery and territorial expansion. The emergence of the polis system during the 8th century BC represented a revolutionary adaptation of Indo-European political institutions to Mediterranean environmental conditions and the requirements of maritime commerce. Unlike the centralized palace kingdoms that had characterized Mycenaean civilization, the city-states that dominated the Greek world combined urban centers with surrounding agricultural territories under governments that balanced aristocratic leadership with broader citizen participation. Archaeological evidence from sites like Athens, Corinth, and Sparta reveals the development of distinctive urban layouts featuring central agorae, specialized craft quarters, and defensive fortifications that enabled effective coordination of military, economic, and religious activities while maintaining the competitive independence that characterized inter-polis relationships. The colonization movement that began during the 8th century BC carried Greek populations throughout the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions, establishing settlements that transmitted Greek cultural traditions while adapting to diverse environmental conditions and cultural encounters. The colony at Pithecusae on Ischia, founded around 750 BC, provides early evidence for Greek expansion into Western Mediterranean regions previously dominated by indigenous populations and Phoenician traders. Excavations have revealed sophisticated metalworking facilities, evidence for long-distance trade connections, and burial practices that maintained Greek characteristics while incorporating local influences and innovations adapted to colonial conditions. The military innovations that enabled Greek colonial expansion built upon Indo-European warrior traditions, while incorporating tactical developments adapted to Mediterranean geography and the requirements of naval warfare. The development of hoplite warfare during the 7th century BC created infantry formations that combined individual martial prowess with coordinated group tactics, producing military systems capable of defeating both indigenous resistance and rival Greek forces. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and artistic representations reveals the standardized equipment that characterized hoplite armies, including bronze helmets with distinctive crest attachments, circular shields reinforced with bronze rims and central bosses, and iron-pointed spears designed for thrusting attacks in close formation combat. The phalanx formation that became synonymous with Greek military effectiveness represented a tactical revolution that maximized the advantages provided by standardized equipment while requiring unprecedented levels of training and discipline from citizen soldiers. Contemporary accounts describe formations 8 ranks deep, featuring heavily armed warriors whose overlapping shields created protective barriers while projecting spear points, created impenetrable offensive capabilities against enemy infantry and cavalry. The psychological impact of advancing phalanxes proved equally important, with the sight and sound of hundreds of bronze-armoured warriors moving in perfect coordination creating panic among enemies unfamiliar with such disciplined formations. The naval developments that supported Greek expansion throughout the Mediterranean built upon maritime traditions while incorporating innovations that created the most effective warships of the ancient world. The trireme, perfected during the 6th century BC, featured revolutionary design concepts that combined maximum speed and manoeuvrability with devastating ramming capabilities and the capacity to transport substantial numbers of marines for amphibious operations. Archaeological evidence from ship sheds at Piraeus and other naval bases reveals the sophisticated infrastructure required to maintain trireme fleets, with specialised facilities for ship construction, equipment storage, and crew training that enabled sustained naval operations across vast distances. The construction techniques that produced trireme effectiveness required advanced understanding of naval architecture, material science, and hydrodynamic principles that enabled the creation of vessels capable of speeds exceeding 8 knots while maintaining structural integrity during combat manoeuvres. The arrangement of 170 oarsmen in 3 tiers required precise calculation of leverage ratios, weight distribution, and crew coordination that represented the pinnacle of ancient naval engineering. Bronze rams recovered from ancient shipwrecks demonstrate the sophisticated metallurgical techniques employed in their manufacture, with reinforced construction designed to penetrate enemy hulls while protecting attacking vessels from structural damage. The intellectual achievements that distinguish Greek civilization from contemporary cultures reflected the successful adaptation of Indo-European linguistic and conceptual traditions to urban environments that encourage philosophical speculation, mathematical investigation, and scientific observation. The development of alphabetic writing during the 8th century BC, adapted from Phoenician scripts, enabled the preservation and transmission of complex ideas while facilitating the educational systems that produced the philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists whose work established the foundations of Western intellectual tradition. The philosophical schools that emerged in Greek cities during the 6th century BC combined rational investigation of natural phenomena with ethical and political theories that address the challenges of urban life and interstate relations. The Ionian philosophers who developed the first systematic approaches to understanding natural causation built upon Indo-European religious concepts while rejecting supernatural explanations in favour of rational analysis based on observation and logical reasoning. Thales of Miletus, traditionally considered the first philosopher, proposed that water constituted the fundamental substance underlying all natural phenomena, initiating a tradition of materialist explanation that would influence scientific thinking for centuries. The mathematical innovations developed in Greek schools built upon Mesopotamian and Egyptian computational techniques, while introducing geometric methods and theoretical approaches that transformed mathematics from practical calculation into abstract investigation of numerical and spatial relationships. Pythagoras and his followers developed geometric theorems that enabled precise architectural planning, astronomical calculation, and engineering applications, while establishing mathematical proof as the standard for validating theoretical propositions. The geometric principles preserved in Euclidean mathematics provided tools for architectural planning, military engineering, and artistic design that enabled the monumental construction projects that characterize classical Greek civilization. The astronomical observations conducted in Greek cities produced calendrical systems, navigation techniques, and cosmological theories that supported both practical activities and philosophical speculation about the nature of the universe. Greek astronomers developed sophisticated models of planetary motion, calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, and established theoretical frameworks that influenced scientific thinking throughout antiquity and beyond. The integration of mathematical analysis with empirical observation created scientific methodologies that distinguish Greek intellectual achievement from the purely practical knowledge systems developed by other ancient civilizations. The medical traditions that developed in Greek cities combined rational investigation of disease processes with therapeutic techniques that established medicine as a systematic discipline based on natural rather than supernatural causation. Hippocratic medicine rejected religious explanations for illness, while developing diagnostic procedures, therapeutic interventions, and ethical standards that influenced medical practice for centuries. The detailed clinical observations preserved in Hippocratic texts demonstrate sophisticated understanding of anatomy, physiology, and pathology that enabled effective treatment of numerous conditions while establishing professional standards that distinguish trained physicians from religious healers and folk practitioners. The artistic achievements that characterize Greek civilization combined technical mastery with aesthetic theories that established enduring standards for sculptural representation, architectural design, and decorative arts. The development of contrapposto in sculpture enabled realistic representation of human anatomy, while creating dynamic compositions that conveyed movement and emotional expression with unprecedented effectiveness. Archaeological evidence from sculptural workshops reveals the sophisticated techniques employed in bronze casting, marble carving, and surface finishing that produced works of extraordinary technical and artistic achievement. The architectural innovations that produced the distinctive orders of Greek temple design combined structural engineering with aesthetic principles that created monumental buildings of exceptional beauty and durability. The Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders established proportional systems that governed column design, entablature decoration, and overall building composition, while providing practical solutions for supporting massive stone roofs and creating interior spaces suitable for religious ceremonies and civic gatherings. The Parthenon at Athens represents the culmination of these developments, with sophisticated optical corrections that compensate for visual distortions while creating a structure of perfect visual harmony. The dramatic traditions that emerged in Greek cities combined religious ritual with artistic performance to create theatrical forms that explored fundamental questions about human nature, divine justice, and political responsibility. The tragedies performed at religious festivals addressed themes derived from heroic traditions while examining moral and philosophical issues relevant to contemporary audiences. The sophisticated dramatic techniques developed by playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides created powerful emotional effects while conveying complex ideas about fate, responsibility, and the relationship between individual desires and social obligations. The historical writing that developed in Greek cities established methodologies for investigating past events while creating narrative techniques that influenced literary development throughout subsequent periods. Herodotus developed systematic approaches to gathering information about foreign peoples and cultures, while creating entertaining narratives that preserved valuable ethnographic and geographical knowledge. Thucydides established higher standards for evidence evaluation and causal analysis, while producing historical accounts that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of political motivation, military strategy, and social dynamics. The political theories developed in Greek cities addressed fundamental questions about justice, authority, and citizenship, while analysing the advantages and disadvantages of different governmental systems. The constitutional analysis preserved in Aristotelian texts demonstrates sophisticated understanding of political dynamics while providing practical guidance for constitutional design and reform. The concept of citizenship that emerged in Greek cities created new forms of political participation, while establishing rights and obligations that distinguished free citizens from dependent populations and foreign residents. The economic systems that supported Greek urban civilization combined agricultural production with craft specialization and long-distance trade to create prosperity levels that enabled the cultural achievements that distinguished Greek civilization from contemporary societies. Archaeological evidence from urban sites reveals sophisticated production systems that manufactured pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other goods for both local consumption and export to distant markets. The standardized weights and measures that facilitated commercial transactions demonstrate the organizational sophistication that enabled Greek merchants to compete effectively with established trading peoples throughout the Mediterranean. The commercial networks that sustained Greek prosperity would soon face their greatest challenge from a people whose origins lay not in the sophisticated urban centres of the Aegean, but in the hills of central Italy, where Italic tribes had established settlements that preserved ancient Indo-European traditions while adapting to Mediterranean conditions. The Romans, emerging from a confederation of Latin-speaking communities along the Tiber River, were transformed from a modest city-state into the dominant power of the ancient world through military innovations, administrative genius, and an expansionist ideology that combined Indo-European warrior culture with unprecedented organisational capabilities. The early Roman settlement on the Palatine Hill reveals archaeological evidence for continuous occupation from the 8th century BC, with material culture that demonstrates clear connections to broader Italic traditions, while showing influences from Etruscan and Greek neighbours. Excavations have uncovered post and beam structures featuring thatched roofs and earthen floors that housed extended families, along with their livestock and stored provisions, following patterns established throughout Indo-European Europe. The pottery assemblages from these early levels include handmade vessels displaying decorative techniques that preserve ancient traditions, while incorporating shapes and firing methods adapted to Mediterranean cooking practices and storage requirements. The linguistic evidence preserved in the earliest Latin inscriptions demonstrates the Indo-European character of Roman culture, while revealing the specific adaptations that distinguished Latin from other Italic dialects. The Praeneste fibula, dating to approximately 600 BC, preserves one of the earliest examples of written Latin with the inscription Manius med fefaced pneumasioi, demonstrating grammatical features that link Latin directly to Proto-Indo-European, while showing phonological developments specific to the Latin branch. The religious formulas preserved in later Roman sources contain archaic vocabulary and grammatical constructions that provide insights into early Indo-European religious practices adapted to Roman conditions and requirements. The military traditions that enabled Roman expansion built upon Indo-European warrior culture, while incorporating tactical innovations adapted to Italian terrain and the requirements of siege warfare against fortified settlements. The manipular system that characterized Middle Republican armies combined the flexibility of small unit tactics with the coordination capabilities of larger formations, creating military organizations that could adapt to diverse combat situations while maintaining the discipline essential for sustained campaigning. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites reveals standardized equipment production that equipped legionaries with identical weapons and armour, ensuring tactical coordination while proclaiming Roman military identity through distinctive design features. The gladius that became the signature weapon of Roman infantry represented a synthesis of Spanish metallurgical techniques with tactical requirements specific to Roman fighting methods. These short swords, measuring approximately 60 centimetres in length, featured double-edged blades optimised for thrusting attacks in close combat situations where longer weapons would prove unwieldy. The sophisticated tempering techniques employed in gladius manufacture produced blades that combined hard cutting edges with flexible cores, preventing breakage during the repeated stabbing motions that characterised Roman sword fighting. The standardised scabbards and belt fittings that accompanied these weapons enabled rapid deployment while protecting blade edges during marches and camp duties. The scutum that protected Roman legionaries combined advanced woodworking techniques with metal reinforcements to create shields that provided maximum protection while maintaining manageable weight for extended combat operations. These rectangular shields, measuring approximately 1.2 metres in height and 0.8 metres in width, featured curved surfaces that deflected incoming missiles, while the central boss provided a striking weapon for close combat. the layered construction employed laminated wood strips covered with leather and reinforced with bronze or iron fittings, creating protective equipment that could withstand repeated impacts from swords, spears and arrows while remaining light enough for effective manipulation during complex tactical manoeuvres. The pilum that armed Roman legionaries represented a revolutionary development in javelin design that combined penetrating power with tactical innovations designed to disrupt enemy formations. These weighted javelins featured long iron points attached to wooden shafts through specially designed socket connections that prevented enemy forces from throwing captured weapons back at Roman formations. The pyramidal point configuration enabled penetration of shields and armour, while the deliberate weakness built into the shaft connection caused the weapon to bend upon impact, making removal difficult and rendering enemy shields unwieldy. Archaeological analysis of pilum points reveals sophisticated metallurgical techniques that produced weapons capable of penetrating bronze armour while maintaining structural integrity during the initial impact. The lorica hamata that protected Roman soldiers during the Middle Republican period demonstrated advanced metalworking capabilities that produced flexible armour systems combining maximum protection with unrestricted movement. These mail shirts, constructed from thousands of interlocking iron rings, required specialised manufacturing techniques that produced rings of consistent size and strength, while enabling assembly into garments that conform to body contours without restricting arm and torso movement. The standardisation evident in surviving examples suggests organised production systems capable of equipping entire legions with identical protective equipment, ensuring tactical coordination while providing individual soldiers with reliable protection against contemporary weapons. The engineering capabilities that supported Roman military operations enabled the construction of siege equipment, field fortifications, and logistical infrastructure that gave Roman armies decisive advantages over enemies lacking equivalent technical expertise. The construction of circumvallation walls during siege operations required sophisticated understanding of military engineering, with double wall systems that protected besieging forces while preventing relief attempts and supply deliveries to besieged cities. Archaeological evidence from sites like Alasea reveals the massive scale of these engineering projects, with walls extending for dozens of kilometres and incorporating obstacles, ditches and defensive positions that demonstrated Roman organisational capabilities and technical mastery. The road construction that facilitated Roman expansion represented one of the most significant infrastructure achievements of the ancient world, with engineering techniques that produced transportation networks capable of supporting rapid military movement and efficient administrative communication across vast territories. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BC, established construction standards that would be replicated throughout Roman territories, with foundations reaching depths of several metres and surface treatments that provided all-weather transportation for wheeled vehicles and marching armies. The precision of Roman surveying techniques enabled road construction that maintained consistent grades across mountainous terrain, while establishing direct routes that minimised travel time between major population centres and military bases. The aqueduct systems that supplied Roman cities with fresh water demonstrated hydraulic engineering capabilities that surpassed all contemporary civilizations in scale and sophistication. The Aqua Claudia, completed during the 1st century AD, transported water across 68 kilometres of varied terrain through a combination of underground channels, surface conduits, and elevated arcades that maintained precise gradients necessary for gravitational flow. The construction techniques employed massive stone blocks fitted with extraordinary precision, while incorporating expansion joints, settling chambers, and maintenance access points that enabled long-term operation with minimal intervention. The daily water supply provided by Roman aqueducts exceeded per capita consumption in many modern cities, while supporting public baths, fountains, and private connections that enhanced urban living standards. The legal system that governed Roman expansion combined Indo-European jurisprudential traditions with innovations necessary for administering diverse populations across vast territories while maintaining political unity and cultural coherence. The 12 tables codified during the 5th century BC preserved ancient customary law while establishing written standards that enabled consistent application of legal principles across Roman territories. The emphasis on property rights, contractual obligations, and procedural safeguards reflected Indo-European legal concepts while incorporating adaptations necessary for governing urban populations and commercial relationships that had not existed in earlier tribal societies. The development of Roman civil law created legal frameworks that distinguished between citizens and non-citizens, while providing mechanisms for incorporating conquered populations into Roman society through various forms of legal status. The concept of citizenship that emerged in Roman practice combined military service obligations with political participation rights, creating incentive systems that encouraged loyalty while providing pathways for advancement that strengthened Roman military capabilities. Extension of citizenship to allied populations and eventually to all free inhabitants of the empire demonstrated the flexibility of Roman legal concepts while maintaining the cultural unity necessary for effective governance of diverse territories. The administrative systems that enabled Roman control over conquered territories combined a military occupation with civilian governance structures that preserved local customs while ensuring imperial authority and resource extraction. The provincial system that emerged during the late Republican period established standardized administrative procedures that could be adapted to diverse cultural and geographical conditions while maintaining consistent taxation, legal administration, and military recruitment. The integration of local elites into Roman administrative structures provided incentives for cooperation while utilizing existing knowledge systems and social networks that facilitated effective governance. The Latin language that spread throughout Roman territories carried with it not merely communication capabilities, but entire cultural and conceptual systems that transmitted Indo-European traditions while adapting to local conditions and requirements. The standardization of Latin through educational systems, legal procedures, and administrative documentation created linguistic unity that facilitated trade, governance, and cultural exchange across territories that had previously been divided by language barriers. The preservation of local languages alongside Latin enabled cultural synthesis while ensuring that Roman administrative and legal concepts could be understood and implemented by diverse populations. The religious practices that accompanied Roman expansion combined traditional Indo-European elements with innovations designed to incorporate conquered populations while maintaining Roman cultural identity and political authority. The Roman pantheon included deities whose names and functions corresponded to gods worshipped throughout the Indo-European world, while incorporating local divinities through interpretatio Romana that identified foreign gods with Roman equivalents. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, whose temple dominated the Roman Forum, preserved ancient Indo-European sky god worship while acquiring specific characteristics related to Roman political authority and imperial expansion. The cult of Mars that played a central role in Roman military religion combined ancient Indo-European war god worship with distinctively Roman characteristics that emphasized disciplined warfare and territorial expansion rather than individual heroic achievement. The elaborate ceremonies that preceded military campaigns involved ritual purification of weapons, oath-taking procedures that bound soldiers to their commanders in the Roman state, and sacrificial offerings designed to ensure divine support for military operations. Archaeological evidence from military camps reveals specialized religious installations that enabled the performance of these ceremonies while maintaining the ritual purity essential for effective divine communication. The imperial expansion that began during the 3rd century BC demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman military and administrative innovations, while revealing the organizational capabilities that distinguished Roman imperialism from earlier conquest systems. The systematic reduction of Greek cities in southern Italy required coordination of land and naval forces across multiple theatres, while maintaining supply lines that extended hundreds of kilometres from Roman bases. The siege of Syracuse during the Second Punic War showcased Roman engineering capabilities and tactical flexibility, with siege equipment that overcame sophisticated Greek defensive systems while naval operations prevented relief attempts and supply deliveries. The Punic Wars that established Roman dominance over the Western Mediterranean tested Roman military capabilities against the most formidable enemy they had yet encountered, while demonstrating the resilience of Roman political institutions and the effectiveness of their alliance systems. Hannibal's invasion of Italy revealed weaknesses in Roman tactical systems while proving the strength of Roman strategic concepts and alliance networks that prevented decisive defeat despite catastrophic battlefield losses. The Roman response to Carthaginian invasion demonstrated organisational capabilities that enabled simultaneous military operations in Italy, Spain, and Africa while maintaining political unity and economic productivity, despite enormous casualties and resource expenditures. The tactical innovations that emerged from the Punic Wars included the development of more flexible legion organisation that combined the advantages of manipular systems with enhanced coordination capabilities necessary for operations against sophisticated enemies employing diverse tactical systems. The cohort organisation that gradually replaced manipular formations created larger tactical units that could operate independently while maintaining the discipline and standardisation that characterised Roman military effectiveness. Archaeological evidence from military sites reveals the evolution of equipment and training systems that produced more professional military forces capable of sustained operations against enemies employing cavalry, elephants, and siege equipment. The conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean brought Roman forces into contact with the sophisticated military traditions of Hellenistic kingdoms while demonstrating Roman adaptability and the superiority of their organisational systems over traditional Mediterranean warfare methods. The defeat of Macedonian phalanx formations at Cynocephalae and Pydna revealed the advantages of flexible legion organisation over rigid formations that could not adapt to varied terrain and tactical situations. Roman commanders learned to coordinate different unit types while exploiting the weaknesses of enemy formations through tactical innovations that combine traditional Roman strengths with adaptations learned through combat experience. The siege techniques that enabled Roman conquest of fortified cities throughout the Mediterranean combined traditional Indo-European warfare methods with engineering innovations that overcame the most sophisticated defensive systems of the ancient world. The siege of Carthage during the Third Punic War required construction of massive siege works that blocked harbour access while enabling assault operations against walls that had resisted previous attacks. The systematic destruction of the city demonstrated Roman determination to eliminate potential threats while providing resources and territory for Roman colonisation and development. The colonisation programs that followed Roman conquest established veteran settlements throughout conquered territories while creating loyal populations that could provide military recruitment and administrative support for continued expansion. The standardised layout of Roman colonies, featuring central forums, grid street patterns and defensive walls, transmitted Roman urban planning concepts while creating population centres that served as administrative and commercial hubs for surrounding agricultural territories. Archaeological evidence from colonial sites reveals the rapid adoption of Roman material culture, while maintaining local traditions that facilitated cultural synthesis and political integration. The cultural assimilation policies that accompanied territorial expansion encouraged the adoption of Roman customs, language, and legal systems, while preserving local traditions that enhanced rather than threatened Roman authority. The establishment of Roman educational systems transmitted Latin literacy and Roman cultural values, while providing pathways for advancement that encouraged local elites to identify with Roman interests. The integration of local religious practices through Interpretatio Romana created syncretic religious systems that maintained cultural continuity while acknowledging Roman political supremacy and divine authorization. The economic systems that supported imperial expansion combined traditional agricultural production with commercial networks that generated revenues necessary for military operations, while creating prosperity that encouraged loyalty among subject populations. The standardization of weights, measures, and coinage facilitated trade while enabling tax collection and resource mobilization that supported armies operating across vast distances from Roman bases. Archaeological evidence from commercial sites reveals the scale of trade networks that connected Roman territories with sources of raw materials and luxury goods throughout the known world. The technological innovations that emerged during the period of imperial expansion would prove their lasting value as Roman authority gradually transformed into new political structures across medieval Europe. The concrete construction techniques that had enabled massive amphitheatres and harbour installations found new expression in the cathedral building programmes that defined medieval urban landscapes, while the standardised military engineering that had conquered the Mediterranean world adapted to the defensive requirements of feudal warfare and territorial consolidation. The Christianization of Indo-European peoples across the former Roman territories created unprecedented opportunities for cultural synthesis as Germanic, Celtic, and Latin traditions merged under the unifying framework of Christian doctrine and institutional organisation. The conversion of Clovis and the Frankish nobility around 496 AD established patterns that would be replicated throughout Northern Europe, where Indo-European warrior elites embraced Christianity while maintaining essential elements of their martial culture and social organisation. Archaeological evidence from Frankish burial sites reveals this synthesis clearly, with Christian symbols appearing alongside traditional Germanic weapons and grave goods that proclaimed both religious conversion and continued adherence to warrior values. The monasteries that emerged throughout medieval Europe served as repositories for classical learning, while adapting Indo-European institutional traditions to Christian religious requirements. The rule of Saint Benedict, established during the 6th century, created organisational frameworks that combined Roman administrative efficiency with Germanic concepts of sworn brotherhood and Celtic traditions of scholarly preservation. These monastic communities maintained the manuscript traditions that preserved classical texts, while developing new forms of artistic expression that synthesized Indo-European decorative motifs with Christian iconographic programs. The illuminated manuscripts produced in monasteries like Lindisfarne and Kells demonstrate the remarkable fusion of Celtic artistic traditions with Christian religious themes, creating decorative programs that preserved ancient Indo-European symbolic systems while adapting them to new spiritual purposes. The interlaced patterns that characterize these works maintain clear connections to Latin artistic traditions while incorporating Christian symbols and narrative elements that created distinctively medieval cultural expressions. The technical mastery evident in these works required specialized training systems that preserved ancient craft knowledge while developing new techniques adapted to manuscript production and religious requirements. The feudal system that emerged across medieval Europe represented a fundamental adaptation of Indo-European social hierarchies to the political and military requirements of post-Roman territorial organisation. The relationships between lords and vassals that characterised feudal society preserved essential elements of the ancient Kourios warrior brotherhood traditions, while creating new institutional frameworks that could coordinate military defence and agricultural production across extensive territories without centralised governmental authority. The ceremonial aspects of feudal investiture, involving oath-taking, symbolic gift exchange, and ritual demonstrations of loyalty, maintained Indo-European legal traditions, while adapting them to Christian religious contexts and medieval political requirements. The castle construction that dominated medieval European landscapes combined Germanic defensive concepts with Roman engineering techniques while adapting to the tactical requirements of mounted warfare and siege operations. The motte and bailey fortifications that appeared throughout Norman territories during the 11th century featured earthwork defences that could be constructed rapidly using local labour while providing effective protection against contemporary military threats. Archaeological excavations at sites like Hendomen reveal sophisticated understanding of defensive engineering that maximised natural terrain advantages, while incorporating innovations in military architecture that reflected changing tactical requirements. The development of stone castle construction during the 12th and 13th centuries demonstrated the continued vitality of Indo-European engineering traditions adapted to medieval conditions and resources. The massive keep towers that characterised Norman castle design combined residential functions with defensive capabilities, creating structures that proclaimed lordly authority while providing secure refuges during military campaigns. The sophisticated defensive systems that protected these installations included multiple walls, protected gateways, and specialised structures for siege defence that demonstrated continuity with Roman military engineering while incorporating innovations adapted to medieval warfare. The military innovations that characterised medieval warfare built upon ancient Indo-European tactical traditions while adapting to new technologies and changing political conditions. The heavy cavalry formations that dominated medieval battlefields preserved elements of the ancient chariot warfare traditions while incorporating innovations in horse breeding, armour production, and weapon design that created military systems of unprecedented effectiveness. The destrier war horses that carried medieval knights represented the culmination of centuries of selective breeding that produced animals capable of carrying fully armoured warriors while maintaining the speed and manoeuvrability necessary for effective cavalry operations. The armour systems that protected medieval warriors combined traditional Indo-European metalworking techniques with innovations that adapted to new weapons technologies and tactical requirements. The mail hauberks that equipped 11th century warriors preserved manufacturing techniques traceable to Roman Larica Hamata, while incorporating design modifications that provided enhanced protection against contemporary weapons. Archaeological analysis of surviving examples reveals sophisticated understanding of metallurgy that produced flexible, protective systems combining maximum coverage with unrestricted movement necessary for mounted combat. The evolution toward plate armour during the 14th and 15th centuries demonstrated continued innovation in protective systems while maintaining the decorative traditions that proclaimed warrior status and cultural identity. The elaborate suits produced in centres like Milan and Augsburg combined functional effectiveness with artistic achievement, featuring decorative programmes that incorporated heraldic symbols, religious motifs, and classical references that demonstrated the cultural sophistication of their owners. The technical mastery required for plate armour production preserved ancient Indo-European metalworking traditions, while developing new techniques that produced protective systems superior to any previous military technology. The weapon developments that characterised medieval warfare preserved essential Indo-European traditions, while incorporating innovations that adapted to changing tactical requirements and technological capabilities. The longswords that equipped medieval knights maintained the symbolic and practical importance of blade weapons in Indo-European warrior culture, while incorporating design features that optimised effectiveness against contemporary armour and tactical situations. Archaeological analysis reveals sophisticated metallurgical techniques that produced blades combining hard cutting edges with flexible cores, preventing breakage during the complex combat manoeuvres that characterised medieval sword fighting. The crossbow technology that transformed medieval siege warfare combined Indo-European mechanical concepts with innovations that created ranged weapons of unprecedented power and accuracy. The steel prods and sophisticated trigger mechanisms that characterised late medieval crossbows required specialised manufacturing techniques that produced weapons capable of penetrating contemporary armour while maintaining reliability during extended military campaigns. The standardisation evident in military crossbow production suggests organised manufacturing systems that could equip substantial military forces with consistent, high-quality equipment essential for effective siege operations and battlefield coordination. The linguistic developments that occurred throughout medieval Europe demonstrated the remarkable persistence of Indo-European language families despite political fragmentation and cultural transformation. The Romance languages that emerged from Latin maintained essential grammatical structures and vocabulary that preserved connections to ancient Indo-European linguistic traditions while adapting to local phonological patterns and cultural requirements. The development of vernacular literature in languages like Old French, Middle High German and Middle English created new opportunities for cultural expression while maintaining the narrative traditions and heroic themes that had characterized Indo-European culture since prehistoric times. The epic poetry that flourished throughout medieval Europe preserved ancient Indo-European heroic traditions while adapting them to Christian cultural contexts and contemporary political conditions. The Chanson de Roland, composed during the 11th century, maintained narrative patterns and heroic values traceable to ancient Germanic warrior culture, while incorporating Christian religious themes and Carolingian political concepts. The sophisticated poetic techniques employed in these works required extensive training in oral composition and performance traditions that preserved ancient Indo-European bardic practices, while developing new artistic forms adapted to medieval cultural requirements. The Arthurian romances that emerged during the 12th century combined Celtic mythological traditions with continental European courtly culture, creating narrative frameworks that preserved ancient Indo-European themes while adapting them to medieval social and religious contexts. The Grail legends that formed central elements of these narratives maintained connections to ancient Indo-European religious concepts involving sacred vessels and divine kingship while incorporating Christian symbolism and medieval mystical traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with Arthurian traditions reveals the continued importance of ancient sacred locations while demonstrating cultural continuity that linked medieval religious practices with prehistoric Indo-European spiritual traditions. The Germanic law codes that governed medieval European society preserved essential Indo-European jurisprudential concepts while adapting them to Christian religious requirements and changing social conditions. The Visigothic Code and other barbarian law collections maintained traditional compensation systems, oath-taking procedures, and ordeal mechanisms while incorporating Roman legal concepts and Christian moral principles. These synthetic legal systems created frameworks for governing complex agricultural societies while preserving the warrior values and social hierarchies that had characterized Indo-European culture throughout its historical development. The guild systems that organized medieval craft production combined Indo-European traditions of specialized knowledge transmission with innovations necessary for coordinating urban economic activities and maintaining quality standards. The elaborate initiation ceremonies that inducted new members into craft guilds preserved elements of ancient warrior brotherhood traditions while adapting them to civilian occupations and Christian religious contexts. Archaeological evidence from guild halls and workshop sites reveals sophisticated organizational systems that enabled effective coordination of production activities while maintaining the cultural traditions that linked medieval craftsmen to ancient Indo-European technological heritage. The agricultural innovations that supported medieval European population growth built upon ancient Indo-European farming techniques while incorporating new technologies and crop varieties that enhanced productivity and enabled territorial expansion. The heavy plough that enabled cultivation of northern European soils represented a technological revolution that combined Indo-European understanding of animal traction with engineering innovations that created agricultural systems capable of supporting dense populations. Archaeological evidence from medieval farming settlements reveals sophisticated understanding of crop rotation, soil management, and livestock integration that produced agricultural surpluses necessary for supporting urban populations and military activities. The horse collar technology that revolutionized medieval agriculture and transportation preserved Indo-European traditions of horse utilization, while incorporating innovations that dramatically enhanced the efficiency of animal power. The sophisticated harness systems that emerged during the medieval period enabled horses to pull heavy loads without respiratory restriction, creating transportation and agricultural capabilities that surpassed anything achieved in the ancient world. The standardization evident in harness production suggests organized manufacturing systems that could equip agricultural communities with consistent, high-quality equipment essential for intensive farming and commercial transportation. The archaeological evidence that confirms the lasting demographic and cultural impact of Indo-European expansion across Eurasia has been dramatically enhanced by advances in ancient DNA analysis and isotope studies that provide direct evidence for population movements and cultural transmission. Genetic analysis of medieval European skeletal remains reveals the continued presence of steppe ancestry markers throughout the population, with percentages varying by region and social status in ways that reflect the complex processes of cultural integration and social stratification that characterized medieval society. The Y chromosome haplogroup distributions that characterize modern European populations preserve clear signatures of ancient Indo-European expansions, while demonstrating the demographic continuity that linked medieval populations to their prehistoric ancestors. The predominance of R1a and R1b lineages throughout Europe provides compelling evidence for the genetic impact of steppe migrations, while revealing regional variations that reflect different phases of Indo-European expansion and subsequent population movements. The correlation between genetic markers and linguistic distributions confirms the reality of ancient population movements, while demonstrating the persistence of Indo-European demographic patterns throughout medieval and modern periods. The isotope analysis of medieval skeletal remains provides additional evidence for population movements and cultural practices that maintained connections to ancient Indo-European traditions. Strontium isotope ratios in tooth enamel reveal patterns of mobility that demonstrate continued importance of pastoral activities and territorial movement in medieval European society, while carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis of bone collagen confirms dietary patterns that preserved ancient Indo-European emphasis on cattle consumption and dairy production. These analytical techniques provide objective evidence for cultural continuity that links medieval populations directly to their Indo-European ancestors. The mitochondrial DNA analysis that traces maternal lineages reveals more complex patterns of cultural transmission and population integration that reflect the processes of conquest, settlement, and cultural synthesis that characterized Indo-European expansion. The diversity of maternal lineages in medieval European populations demonstrates the incorporation of indigenous women into Indo-European societies, while confirming the predominantly male character of the original migrations. This genetic evidence supports historical accounts of warrior band expansions that establish political dominance while creating new cultural syntheses through intermarriage and cultural adaptation. The linguistic evidence that documents the evolution of Indo-European languages throughout the medieval period provides crucial insights into processes of cultural transmission and adaptation that maintained essential characteristics while enabling adaptation to changing conditions. The preservation of core vocabulary relating to kinship, warfare, religion, and social organisation demonstrates remarkable continuity in fundamental cultural concepts, while phonological and grammatical changes reveal the dynamic processes of linguistic evolution that created the modern European language families. Comparative analysis of medieval texts reveals shared narrative traditions, legal concepts, and religious practices that maintain clear connections to reconstructed Proto-Indo-European culture. The archaeological evidence from medieval sites throughout Europe confirms the continued importance of material culture traditions that preserve Indo-European characteristics while demonstrating adaptation to new technologies and cultural influences. The weapon assemblages from medieval warrior burials maintain clear connections to ancient Indo-European military traditions, while incorporating innovations that reflect technological advancement and changing tactical requirements. The decorative motifs that appear on medieval metalwork, pottery, and architectural elements preserve ancient Indo-European artistic traditions while developing new forms of expression adapted to Christian religious contexts and medieval aesthetic preferences. The genetic evidence that links modern European populations to ancient Indo-European expansions provides compelling confirmation of the demographic impact of these prehistoric migrations, while revealing the complex processes of cultural integration and population mixture that characterized European development. genome-wide analysis of ancient and modern DNA demonstrates substantial steppe ancestry throughout European populations, with regional variations that reflect different phases of Indo-European expansion and subsequent historical developments. The persistence of these genetic signatures throughout thousands of years of cultural change provides objective evidence for the lasting impact of Indo-European migrations on European demographic structure. The legacy of Indo-European expansion extends far beyond genetic and linguistic evidence to encompass the fundamental cultural, social, and political institutions that continue to characterize European civilization. The democratic traditions that emerged in ancient Greek cities preserved Indo-European concepts of warrior assemblies and collective decision-making, while adapting them to urban conditions and complex political requirements. The legal systems that govern modern European societies maintain essential characteristics derived from ancient Indo-European jurisprudential traditions, including emphasis on individual rights, procedural safeguards, and compensation-based justice that can be traced directly to prehistoric origins. The technological traditions that enabled Indo-European expansion continue to influence modern European development through the preservation of metallurgical knowledge, engineering capabilities, and agricultural techniques that form the foundation of contemporary industrial civilization. The scientific methodologies that emerged in Greek cities built upon Indo-European intellectual traditions, while creating systematic approaches to natural investigation that established the foundations of modern science. The artistic and literary traditions that characterize European culture maintain clear connections to ancient Indo-European narrative patterns, heroic values, and aesthetic principles, while developing new forms of expression adapted to contemporary conditions and requirements. The transformation of medieval Europe represented not the end of Indo-European influence, but rather its culmination in the creation of cultural syntheses that preserved essential characteristics while adapting to new conditions and incorporating influences from diverse sources. The rise of nation-states during the late medieval period created political frameworks that combined ancient Indo-European concepts of tribal identity with innovations necessary for governing complex territorial entities. The emergence of vernacular literatures enabled the preservation and transmission of cultural traditions, while creating new opportunities for artistic expression and intellectual development. The expansion of European civilization throughout the modern period carried Indo-European cultural traditions to every continent, while demonstrating the continued vitality of institutional frameworks and technological capabilities that originated in the prehistoric steppes. The democratic revolutions that transformed European politics during the 18th and 19th centuries built upon ancient Indo-European concepts of individual freedom and collective governance, while creating new political systems adapted to industrial conditions and mass society. The scientific and technological achievements that characterize modern civilization represent the culmination of intellectual traditions that began with Indo-European innovations in metallurgy, transportation, and systematic observation of natural phenomena. Thus, the story of the Indo-Europeans represents not merely an ancient migration, but the foundation of European civilization itself. From their origins on the Pontic-Caspian steppes through their expansion across Eurasia and their transformation into the diverse cultures of medieval and modern Europe, these peoples created the linguistic, cultural, and institutional foundations that continue to shape human development. Their legacy endures in the languages we speak, the legal systems that govern our societies, the technological capabilities that define our civilization, and the cultural values that guide our understanding of human potential and achievement. The archaeological, genetic, and linguistic evidence that documents their expansion provides compelling testimony to one of the most significant cultural transformations in human history, demonstrating the power of technological innovation, social organization, and cultural adaptation to reshape the world through determination.